Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed by the guests are solely their own and do not represent the opinions of the host, me, ? Content warning: the following discussion touches on controversial and disturbing content, such as death, euthanasia, suicide, killing, rape analogies, pro-mortalism, omnicide, and interventions to bring about extinction. Suffice to say, viewer and listener discretion is advised. Thank you. All right, and we're recording. Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be covering the topic of EFILism. I'm joined by four prominent EFILists: YouTuber Glynos, who made the popular series The Road to Anti-natalism, artist and YouTuber Life Sucks, host of the Opposite Thought Show, an Arabic EFILism page with 20,000 followers, co-founder of Anti-natalism International, Laith Malik Reem, and finally, the director of the movie, The EFIList, co-host of the Exploring Anti-natalism podcast, and another co-founder of Anti-natalism International, Amanda Oldphan Sukanik. And also, I forgot to add this in, you're the co-host of the Antinatal News, right?
Indeed, I am.
And upcoming new podcast, Right to Die podcast. With
to soon be named.
Yeah. So prior to this panel, I spoke privately to the founder of EFILism, Gary Amendum, for a few minutes last weekend to cover anything I may have missed. So thank you all for coming to today to discuss your views. Was there anything I may have missed in the intros that you would like to expand on further before we get right into the questions?
Nope, not for me.
Nope.
All right. So to start off, this is one of the most important questions I think that's been plaguing all our minds. How do you spell EFILism? Is it with capital EFIL and then lowercase ISM, or capital E and then ISM? I've seen it spelled both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I guess I go first real quickly. Because I've just been writing this coloring book about antinatalism. And so I wrote a page on EFILism, and I just spelled it as you would any normal English word. But I mentioned Amanda's movie, The EFIList, in the paragraph of text. And my proofreader actually came back and said, you know, I checked IMDb and she spells it capital EFIL, lowercase IST. And so that's a stylized spelling in a movie title. So then I went back and corrected it, which I think seems correct. But it seems to me like that's a stylized way to do it, because you're obviously trying to bring attention to the word life and trying to make people realize that it is there, even though it's spelled backwards. But I would just think, it's just my opinion, but if someone were writing a book about antinatalism and they were talking about EFILism, they'd probably write it just like you would antinatalism, just lowercase. My opinion, that's my thought.
Anybody want to debate that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say and add, sorry, Amanda, that I spell it the EFIL capital letters and the IST lowercase, because also to focus on the word life spelled backwards. So this is the most important thing to me. Please go ahead, Amanda.
It's okay. I mostly agree with what's been said already. Like, yeah, I do the capitalization of EFIL, for the purposes of the movie and stuff. I thought it made more sense because obviously I was trying to get people who were not familiar with antinatalism and EFILism to watch it. And I figured that made the whole idea of it being life spelled backwards a little more obvious. When I'm just like typing something to somebody, I don't do all that showbiz. I don't add all that showbiz to it. I just think it's kind of unnecessary, and it just looks a bit like silly to do each time, I think. However, I have noticed that my phone now autocorrects to it being all in capital letters quite often. So sometimes I do end up sending something and it's all in caps without my even meaning to. So I don't know.
Do you have any opinion, Glynos?
No opinion whatsoever. It's really not important. I was trying to think what I used for my YouTube videos, and I really don't remember. Sorry.
So it seems to be the consensus is it's fine both ways. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
And that concludes today's conversation.
That's the answer everybody's been waiting for. Yeah.
We've settled that. Okay. So I want to move on to the definition. Before we detail your individual views or perspectives on this, I think we really need a definition of EFILism. And I'd like to start off with Laith, then Life Sucks, Glynos, and then Oldphan.
Yeah, sure. So EFILism in general is about realizing that all sentient beings suffer and they die eventually for no good reason. So every single sentient being who has a nervous system, who suffers for unnecessary reason, should be in peace. Should not be exposed to all this kind of suffering and pain in general in this life. And life itself produces suffering. So EFILism, the goal of EFILism is to put an end to all this unnecessary suffering by having the red button, which is so controversial to many people.
Thanks, Laith, and Life Sucks.
Sure, can I just quote from my book?
Yep.
All right, this is page 5. E is for EFILism. EFILism, life spelled backwards, is an anti-natalist ethical framework devised by the American philosopher Inevitability. While similar to negative utilitarianism, EFILism's claim is that there can be no real utility, as all positive experience is merely a facade created by DNA evolution in order to continue biological replication. DNA life is described by the acronym CRAP, C-R-A-P, cannibalism, reproduction, addiction, and parasitism. It is an enhanced form of anti-natalist philosophy. EFILists are often vegans involved in anti-suffering activism.
Thank you. Glynos?
Welcome.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'll be able to give a short and concise definition, but I think it's worth bringing up why the term EFILism came around. I think Inevitability wasn't particularly happy with the focus on the conclusion that, therefore we shouldn't have children, and particularly the focus on humans shouldn't have children. So I see antinatalism as being a conclusion that, therefore one shouldn't have children. And there are many ways that you can arrive at that antinatalist position, right? You see China with the one-child policy. It's a form of antinatalism. You might think that humans are destroying the natural habitat of the world, and therefore you think that humans should go extinct, as I believe voluntary extinctionist humanist movement, I think that's what their view is on it. But I think we needed some term, and whether it's called Benatarian antinatalism, which I consider to be indistinguishable almost, maybe apart from one small point, from EFILism. So I think EFILism is just, like Leith said, shining a light on the fact that life is an unwinnable game, right? We can, even as antinatalists, or EFILists, we can't really have any conception of how horrible things are, right? We can talk about things and we can show videos of zebras being eaten alive or something like this. We can talk about victims of rape, victims of pedophilia, animals suffering in the wild. We can talk about all of these things and we can agree that they're bad, but we simply have no comprehension of how bad things can be. On this planet, we've had at least 3 billion years of life, and I don't know how many years of sentient life, 300 million, maybe more, maybe even a billion. It's a horror show. It's been awful. And as much as, we all live in relatively comfortable conditions, right? We have air conditioning, flats, and so on. We don't need to worry about the food that we get. But still, this present day, life on Earth is awful. It is a horror story. And I don't think, if you just have this term antinatalism, which says, it's better not to bring children into existence, I don't think that quite captures the fact that this is a totally unwinnable game. It's been a horror story from the beginning. And there are, some people enjoy some aspects of their lives, great, right? A little bit of compensation, fine. It's better that we have that compensation. But this issue is massively serious, that life is an incredibly horrific harm that we have no ability to comprehend. And EFILism simply shines a light on that and says, look at what life is. It's not about protecting the environment. It's not about, humans have made some mistakes and therefore they should be punished by going extinct. It's that this whole thing of life on Earth is a horror show.
Thank you, Glynos. And Amanda?
I really should have spent some time before this coming up with like a couple of precise sentences, but I just wrote something really quickly. The recognition that sentience produces waste in the form of suffering, and that human beings, as the only creatures who can understand this predicament, have a responsibility to prevent that waste and suffering from continuing. So it's, I think, related to what Glynos said, it's a recognition of what is going on this planet, what sentience is, and responding to that in a difficult but realistic way. What do we do as the only creatures on Earth who have any ice cubes chance in hell of being able to produce, to prevent that suffering from continuing? And I also think that, you know, if human beings go extinct, you know, that doesn't come for free. It doesn't happen in a world that, you know, that doesn't exist without all of these other sentient creatures. Like, whatever we do with our existence has an impact on them. And I think we have a responsibility to them as like creatures to also, you know, free them from their cycle of sentience. That it would be the most ethical thing for us to do, to at the very least converse with each other about what the answer to that problem is.
Do all four of those definitions, do they differ in any way from what Gary says or what A&I defined it on the website as?
I mean, I personally just tried to keep in line with what Gary has said, because he is the founder. Actually, do you mind if I follow up what Glynos said and
yeah, that's fine.
Read a passage from Benatar, because I think it really kind of defines the difference, because a lot of people don't understand what is the difference between Benatarian anti-natalism and EFILism.
Yeah, that's actually one of my questions, like later on. So like, yeah, we can do that now.
Okay, all right. It's in the conclusion of the book where Benatar, he kind of just seems to just speak off the cuff, because I mean, this book, I mean, it's so great. There's so many footnotes, and it's just so exhaustively explained. I feel like maybe he just didn't put so much thought into the ending. I don't know, but I'll just read this. And I think reading this, you'll see how Inevitability had a problem with this, even though they are very close. All right, he says, quote, this is page 224, by the way. Although there are many non-human species, especially carnivores, that also cause a lot of suffering, humans have the unfortunate distinction of being the most destructive and harmful species on Earth. So right there, is that true? I mean, there's no footnote there. Mosquitoes are pretty damn harmful, right? The amount of suffering in the world could be radically reduced if there were no more humans. And again, I think that Inevitability would have a problem with that. Like, if humans just disappeared, I mean, how much percentage of the world's suffering is really gone? I don't think a lot. Even if the misanthropic argument is not taken to this extreme, it can be used to defend at least a radical reduction of the human population. Although the end of humanity would greatly reduce the amount of harm, it would not end at all. The remaining sentient beings would continue to suffer, and their coming into existence could still be a harm. I kind of have a problem with the word could there. This is one reason why the misanthropic argument does not go as far as the arguments I have advanced in this book. Arguments that arise not from antipathy towards the human species, but rather from concern about harms to all sentient beings. Moreover, as resistant as people are to the philanthropic argument, they would still be more resistant to the misanthropic argument one. But the misanthropic argument is not in the least incompatible with the philanthropic one. It is unlikely that many people will take to heart this conclusion that coming into existence is always a harm. It is even less likely that many people will stop having children. By contrast, it is quite likely that my views will either be ignored or dismissed. So I think that that's kind of a defeatist attitude that Benatar has expressed before. And when you guys brought up EFILism to him in the podcast interview, he said, no, he's just not as much of an activist as Inevitability would. And I think that's really the difference between the two, is that there's just this core of activism and EFILism that we have to do something.
Well, if I can just respond to that just real quick.
Sure.
I think yes, Inevitability was responding to some of what you just said directly from Better Never to Have Been, certainly, but it's also this really quite massive resistance from the community that sentience is the issue in antinatalism. I mean, there's a lot of denial that Benatar even brought up the animals. I mean, even when you show it to certain people, they are resistant to it. And I would say that in what is it, late 2011, early 2012, when EFILism first became about, that was pretty intensely loud. That voice against sentience being included in this really only being an anthropocentric philosophy was pretty aggressively defended by a lot of antinatalists. They did not want to have any mention of the animals in there and were very resistant to the fact that Benatar even mentioned them. And I think that still persists today. I think we're still seeing the same resistance, and I think it's even louder. And I think that a great deal, I always say that I think a great deal of modern antinatalism, even perhaps to say a lot of modern Benatarian antinatalism, is kind of turning into like a vehement 2.0, that the resistance to the animals being included in the consideration is so loud.
Yeah, the thing, I think that the thing is, why do we have this resistance when we mention animals and wildlife in general, is because people think that we're playing God and we're speaking on behalf of these animals. But the thing is that it doesn't take too much thinking to realize that wildlife animals suck. It's full of pain and suffering. Like if you watch hyenas eating a wild beast while he's still alive, and you see how they're eating him slowly, starting from his thigh to his stomach to everything, and while he's still suffering. If we ask the victim in this situation, like, would he rather be dead or alive? Of course, they're gonna choose to be dead, not alive, not to suffer, to stop the pain, to end the pain. So I still do not understand why people still attack EFILism, yeah, because of that.
Yeah, I know you might want to talk about this later, but it's a concept I think is really core to EFILism, is what Mendham calls the burden of intelligence, which equals a responsibility, like an intrinsic responsibility we have to help not just humans, but all of the animals, all the sentient animals.
Yeah, I think he's brought it up a few times that non-action is an action in and of itself, right? That if you do, going back to Lath's example about the wildebeest being eaten alive, theoretically, at least, humans are the only ones with the chance of making that decision of, do we allow it to continue, or do we decide to do something to make it stop? And some people, like with the trolley problem, I guess, where people say, well, no, I wouldn't touch it because I don't want to make that decision. I don't want to play God. In a sense, in a very meaningful sense, you're kind of saying, yeah, I am okay with the wildebeest experiencing this. And I think as EFILists, something we would all agree with is that, no, I'm not okay with that. And non-action is essentially giving it a green light.
Yeah. Any decision we make is impactful. So make the one that, prevents or stops as much harm. Yeah.
Kind of worried about some technical stuff. I'm worried that I'm going to lose this recording. Would any of you be available to do a backup recording while we're doing it?
Yeah, I would. Sure.
Oh,
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Okay. You should be able to do it now. Just let me know.
All good. Yep.
Okay, good. Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah. Nope. Yeah, no problem.
The other thing is, Lath, could you adjust your mic just a little bit? Because it sounds like it's backwards. I'm not too sure if the microphone is that way, Lath.
You mean the way it is right now?
Yeah.
No, I think this is how it is.
Okay, I guess it's just it sounds better when it's closer to you, but
is it better this way?
For me, it is. Yeah, I don't know for the rest of you guys. If it gets too
Please
tiring,
let me know.
Yeah, it sounds good right now.
So when I speak, I'll
okay,
let it be closer.
Shove it in your mouth. Yeah.
Okay. I can't find the question right now, but off the top of my head, how do you ground that positive duty to other animals?
We shouldn't sit in silence. Can you repeat the question and maybe elaborate on it?
Okay. How do you ground a positive duty to wild animals?
would you mind explaining the question a little bit more? So positive duty in terms of your,
Like
that we have these moral duties
Yeah.
to
In
not
terms
just
of interventionalism? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, lag.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a tough question. I don't, in many cases, I don't believe in too many positive duties. I think the core of my ethics is not to do harm, first of all. And like I mentioned earlier, that we are, in a sense, doing harm, potentially doing harm to them by not letting them, by letting them go into these dangerous situations, right? So I noticed one of the questions you posted was, why do people get concerned about cats, or why do people bring up cats? And I think this goes back to a situation where Gary mentioned that he had put down and euthanized some healthy cats. And this obviously caused furore and a controversy amongst people. And it is a tricky question. Like, what do we, I have no, there's nothing inside me that says like, I want to go out and kill an animal, right? Nothing inside me sees a dog or a pig or a cow and thinks like, I want to kill them. But I do think in certain situations, animals, and I don't think that this applies to humans, and I'm sure we're going to get into this in a lot more detail a little bit later. I don't think that animals in general have the interests in continuing to exist that humans have. I do think they fall short. They do fall short of what humans have. And it's difficult for me to say it, but all things considered, I think that it is in the interests of animals to be euthanized.
It's in the interest of the animal to be euthanized.
Mm-hmm. I don't see what kind of, like, when we look at humans and the investments that we put into the future, and we can see how those things can be cashed out and how hard we work to achieve goals and so on. I think those qualify as interests that we shouldn't violate and rights that we shouldn't violate. But when it comes to animals, I don't see animals who have a vested interest in their future. You know, they don't. And this could be I mean, you could argue against it with like birds who build nests and so on, but I don't know to what extent they're cognitive of the fact that, you know, they are investing in the future and they want to see the rewards that come from that. Now, I think in some ways, and I know that this is going to come up later, but maybe it's relevant to what I'm saying now. When I consider myself and I think like, well, my exit strategy for life, right? Probably I'm going to die in a long, drawn-out way with cancer or heart disease or whatever it is, poor health, dementia. And I think, like, how would I feel about the idea of somebody just sneaking up behind me and shooting me in the head? I see advantages to that. I see that it could possibly be in my interest just to be killed randomly. I don't advocate for doing that to other people. Definitely 100% don't advocate for it. But I do see the benefits of that. Personally, if I'm given a choice, I would choose not to be killed. And I think that personal autonomy in humans is something that we should respect and we should value. When it comes to animals, I don't see that. And I fully accept that that can be a very controversial point of view. But when we consider the hardship that animals are likely to face, I think it's in their interests to end their lives.
Okay, life sucks and Laith, you guys are animal rights people. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I mean, I think a lot of this discussion will just be me trying to think, oh, what would Gary say about this? But I think he would say that, you know, we have sensory experience. We know what it's like to experience pain and suffering, and we know the animals have very similar, if not exactly the same, experience of suffering that we are. And like Leno said, yeah, if someone just turned me off yesterday, is that really that great of a harm? I mean, it's going to prevent my future suffering. You know, having just witnessed someone die horribly, it's hard to argue against that. And I think the duty just comes from our experience, knowing that we would want someone to do the right thing for us. Oh, and also, you know, Gary's not the only one who has that opinion. Like, a lot of people criticize Ingrid Newkirk, the founder of PETA, she has the exact same view. She's very pro euthanizing animals, perfectly healthy animals, because there's no one to take care of them. They're just going to suffer out in the wild, so that's the right thing to do.
Laith?
Yeah, I do agree what Glinos said and what LifeSucks said. Unfortunately, animals have much more difficult lives, in my opinion. Human life is much more comfortable, much more easier. We do not live in nature. We live in cities. We live in concretes. We live inside buildings because of the amount of danger in this nature. So even if we do not talk about nature, if we talk about farm animals, they suffer much more than wild animals, because basically that's what they're being exploited for on a daily basis, for human exploitation and human consumption. So I do think that if they had the chance to decide for themselves, they would prefer to be euthanized. But the reason, as we all know, the reason why they're still here and they still procreate in nature is because they're not aware of the consequences of mating. So that's why they're controlled by the DNA, unfortunately.
Okay, Amanda, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I kind of have like two answers to this. So on one hand, if we're talking about animals like right now, I mean, I think that at the very least, we have a responsibility to them to constantly be reviewing what are, currently considered our best practices in their interests. And I think that policies, I mean, Tejas was saying it, in the recent interview that hasn't come out yet too, like, he rescues animals all the time, and he's obligated by threat of persecution, basically, to go through this process of capturing them, which they don't like, most times, neutering, spaying them, so forcing them to undergo basically a desexualizing, painful operation, then to be thrown into a cage where they're never adopted. Nobody ever is there to save the day in tons of situations, and then to be euthanized later because, they have to make room for new animals. So I can't see how that policy and that methodology is in their best interest. I think it would be often the best thing to do is to euthanize them as soon as possible, basically. I think that there is a bit of an active and prevalent delusion that there is always, all you got to do is try hard enough. There's always somebody that's going to adopt. There's always some place for them to go. There's always somebody that's going to pay the medical bills to feed them. And I don't think that that's the truth. And it's a horribly sad circumstance. But again, I think some of what are considered our best practices in the interest of animals currently, I think the animals would be better served by a pro-death technique or whatever. I'm losing my words a little bit. But the other part of this conversation is our responsibility to animals in an extinction circumstance. So I liken that. What I always say is that if human beings are going extinct, which is the result of anti-natalism and EFILism, if that's the course that we're on, at some point we're going to reach what I call the vehement and EFIList crossroads. We have two choices. Do we let them inherit the earth like vehement would like them to, or are we going to do something about it? And I think that when we're talking about what our last chance is to make a decision one way or the other, I think our responsibility is in doing something about preventing their continued existence, as opposed to the vehement perspective, which is, again, no offense to last night, really like the guy tremendously, but this sort of delusional thinking like they're going to have these happy, beautiful, wonderful lives and nature is going to restore itself to some sort of paradise. I don't think that that's what's going to happen. And it's going to be 7-8 billion years of this constant cycle of life and death and eating each other. And somebody was bringing up to me the other, like lemurs are the only ones that should have a say about what happens to lemurs, but if lemurs were able to evolve to a point where they, have their own pessimistic philosophy and can reach an EFIList conclusion, I think they'd be pretty pissed off if they found out that creatures existed, billions of years before them that reached this conclusion and did nothing. So, so I think there's kind of two circumstances revolved around this question.
Yeah, it's like a misunderstanding that humans are the cause, and creating and enduring the most suffering on earth is ridiculous.
So you mentioned on the individual case that a pro-death view would still be appropriate. Then are hunters doing a good thing for the individual animal?
I don't think so, because they're not euthanizing those animals.
Yeah,
They're
they're killing for sport.
idiots with guns that are
But isn't that better
badly.
than getting eaten alive?
It might be if the animal never knows what hits it, but I don't
Well,
think that's what. Sorry, go ahead. Life sucks.
Oh, I was just gonna say a statistic. Hunters only kill 50% of their prey. The rest are maimed and die horribly.
Okay.
Yeah, and intent has to come into it too, right? You couldn't have, like, let's say, just a purely hypothetical situation where you had like a person who enjoyed raping, but had some medicine in their semen or something and didn't know about it, and they were going around raping people, and there was an unintended positive consequence. We still wouldn't call that action good. And it's the same thing with hunters. Intention is important.
Is it? But I thought you guys are consequentialists. Does intention matter for consequentialists? As a negative utilitarian, life sucks. Does that like fit into your ethic?
I mean, it probably depends on the circumstance, but I mean, generally consequences are what's important. I'm just saying hunting results in more suffering and negative consequences.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. I think you have to ask that question kind of on a scenario basis.
So
yeah, and sorry, if you look at like single situations, you may say, oh yeah, from a consequentialist or utilitarian point of view, that results in the lowest level of harm or whatever. But then you also have to think about the ramifications and consequences that come about from that we have people who enjoy killing for sport, who are allowed to kill for sport. Do we really trust those? And so those consequences are not just from these individual actions, but they have consequences for society at large too.
Yeah, I think one scenario people bring up is if someone knocks someone out to take an organ from someone to give to someone else, like, oh, they're helping someone or something. But if doctors had this notion that they could just knock people out and take their organs and stuff, then that would be bad for society. So
I should probably ask this. What are I just assumed, are you all negative utilitarians?
Sure.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, I lean very much towards negative utilitarianism. I do have issues with. I do give some consideration to non-hedonistic theories on morality or ethics too. Like something doesn't sit right. The idea of like slandering the dead or something like this, or cheating on a partner that they'll never find out, even if there's no negative consequences. I still have issues with that. But yeah, my primary focus is, or my primary position is negative utilitarian.
Leif?
I do agree with Glinos.
Could you give some more because I think since I got involved, a lot of people bring up cats when it comes to EFILism as a criticism. Could you, either of you, any of you, explain the historical context of that criticism, and yeah, like what's been talked about with that?
Mendham euthanized a cat, and it's been turned into, he initiated World War III or something. I don't know.
Okay, so he euthanized a healthy cat, and now people are saying EFILists want to kill cats. Is that the gist of it?
Yes.
No.
I think maybe he justified the reasons why he did it, and maybe people thought like, oh, well, if we apply this to all animals, are EFILists saying then they want to go around and find random animals and kill them? Maybe I vaguely remember an argument of that sort.
Well, that's kind of where my mind's going, because if you say death is good for an animal, then if I have like a cat right now, why shouldn't I kill the cat or euthanize it?
Yeah, I would say it depends on we have to make a reasonable decision about what the fate of that animal is. And I think that, if an animal is cared for and does bring value to the owner or the friend's life, then I think that's perfectly fine to continue existence. When I'm talking about euthanizing animals, my thought isn't to comfortable kind of cats and dogs who are living with humans and domesticated animals who are living relatively comfortable lives. I'm thinking of zebras and wildebeests and things like this, where I'm weighing it up in my mind. What would I do? Would I allow them to go into the jaws of a lion? Or if I could euthanize them, would I euthanize them? And I would certainly say that the better option. I cannot see a good argument for saying a good argument that isn't just full of guy and nonsense, that says, no, we should allow them to freely roam on the safari to be eaten alive. I would love to hear, I know that you're here as the question asker, but I would love to hear a justification for that, how someone would sit back and think, yeah, I'm comfortable with allowing an animal to be eaten alive.
Mm-hmm. So then the concern about EFIList going out and killing wildlife, is that not justified if that's what you're saying right now? You said that it would be better if they were euthanized. So what would stop someone from doing that?
So I'd rather see this as a policy. I would rather see this as a decision that we come together and agree on, right? So first of all, you have to have the argument, and it's an incredibly long road to go down. First, you have to explain to people that bad things are bad, which a lot of people still don't accept in philosophy world, that bad things are bad. But ultimately, I'm not in favor of individuals going around seeing animals and killing them. What I would like is for a discussion where there are arguments to be made. I would like us to win the argument. I would like for people to see the benefits of the reasons why we're doing it, not simply let's go around and kill animals, because this again is going to have negative consequences. We will be seen as hooligans, as vandals, as people who are maniacal and have a thirst for killing and things like this. So no, I think it has to be done in a way where you convince people. I know this might sound incredibly naive and optimistic, but a way where we can convince people that it is not in their interest and that we have policies and safe methods to go about doing things in the right way.
Right. I agree with Glynos there. It's not that anybody is saying that in vigilante style, we all go around and solve the problem of wild animal suffering as individual agents. But I do think that there are instances like the feral cat issue, where I think this, which was the circumstance around the cat that was euthanized, that's called, that so much drama has been built around. And quite frankly, there are, it's not just EFILists that are saying that's probably the best answer to that solution. I mean, there are other activists, that are making the same argument. So I think that there are individual instances of certain animal populations where this maybe would, in the more immediate future would be the correct path, as opposed to, something like how to solve the problem of wild animal suffering. I agree would be best served as like some kind of policy.
I just want to touch on a meta question and then probably go back to the original questions that I had, because I'd like to get as many topics as we can in this session. There's conversation about conversations, but has conversations happened in the form of like what we're doing right now? And why not, if that's the case?
You mean like amongst EFILists?
Yeah, like a bunch of EFILists getting together, having a conversation about what ought to be done and plans, policies, strategy, advocacy, whatever, hashing out disagreements, blah, 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 blah.
I mean, if you don't, I'll go quickly. I mean, I don't, not really. I mean, we certainly have had hangouts in the past, and, we have talked, and I mean, a great deal of the members of ANI are EFILists. So in a sense, that's been like a weekly meeting, although we're talking about other things besides this subject, but not really. And I think a big part of that is just, well, I don't really know. I think there's multiple factors that have not caused that to happen, but I do think it's a good thing that it is happening now.
What do you think, Glynos? Because like you had meetups before, right?
Yeah, they were mostly casual, without any particular strategy, and maybe even to hopefully have some therapeutic benefit for people who are coming to antinatalism and just kind of got fed up of living around people who just kept telling them that they were bad people for being antinatalists. I don't think it's the most pressing issue. So if we think about like, oh well, what policy are we going to implement to safely euthanize animals and reduce harm? I don't think that's this is the right time to discuss it. I think at the moment, the pressing issue is that people think that life is great. And I think that our job as EFILists at the moment is to try to argue that life isn't great. Once progress is made, or if progress is made in that sphere, then you open the discussion. If I don't think I would take part in a conversation on the best practices to euthanize animals simply because I don't know. I really am uneducated on the best euthanizing processes and so on. So I don't know. What I do know is that at the moment there's an unacceptable level of harm and that people dismiss it and people don't care about it. And even the people who say, oh yeah, isn't it awful? It's terrible. They don't really, it's not really in there. It doesn't move them and it doesn't affect them in a way that I feel that it should. And there are many psychological reasons as to why we do that, right? We all want to get on with our lives. We all want to believe that the world is a happy place. But at the moment, that is the argument that needs to be had. That the majority, 99% of the people, at least when they verbalize their thoughts, they think in general, life is a wonderful thing. And I think our job is to say, yeah, sorry, it isn't. Look, and that's where my focus is.
So, okay, so your focus is on that, about highlighting like sort of the diagnosis of life, so to speak. So what about the exit strategy or a graceful exit? Is that a low priority right now?
For me, it is, but I'll let other people go in simply because, again, I'm not knowledgeable. I'm not educated enough. I think I can make persuasive arguments about why people shouldn't have children, about the harms of coming into existence. I think I can do that. Talking about the best practices for the exit strategy, I'm not the guy who's going to be able to do that, but maybe someone else is.
If I can just jump in really quick, like I feel exactly the same way. I don't think it's of the top priority. It's the thing that most people want to hear about, you know, when this subject is brought up, and it's the thing that most people want an answer to. But I mean, as far as what I've been saying is I can't possibly know the answer to a lot of this stuff. My reason for making the argument is because I believe that it needs to be a wider argument amongst humans in general. Human beings should be having this conversation on a much wider scale. And
which conversation, the extinction part or the
whole just the EFIList, both, absolutely both. I mean, I think the diagnosis part has to come first. How you fill the prescription has to come later. But I mean, you know, none of us have any power to set an agenda, to write an itinerary, or, you know, but what we're arguing for basically is that human beings in general need to be having this conversation. It should be a conversation the human race is having, because there are all of these unknowns, and how to do it best ethically is not something we're going to be able to solve as, you know, 4 people talking in a Zoom room.
Okay. So just want to go on to materialism. Is there a connection with EFILism and materialism? Is this a core tenet? Glenos, you mentioned this in one of your series. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm just worried that I'm answering a lot of the questions. Maybe Leif wants to say something. I can speak about it at great length, but go on, Leif.
Yeah, no worries, Glenos. So before I answer this question, I'm gonna go back to the cat part.
Sure, yeah.
In the Arab world, when I have discussions with people from the Arab world, mostly non-vegans who have cats as pets at their homes, they think that they're doing a good thing by having this cat, by feeding this cat. Of course, they feed her fish and they feed her non-vegan food. So it does not make any sense to me. If you really care about animals, you should keep this cat outside, let her hunt by herself. But for you to feed her animal products, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Consequentially, what's the difference?
Cats have to have some animal.
The difference is that you're bringing this food ready for her without her trying to hunt or without her doing some effort.
Okay.
And you're contributing to the suffering of the fish and killing of these fish. So it doesn't make sense. Like, you cannot really claim that you're an animal lover when you have a cat and you feed her other animals. It doesn't make any sense to me.
But the cat makes someone else suffer, right?
So, sorry, I didn't get your question.
The cat kills another animal, and probably in a worse way.
Yeah, of course, but it's not your fault in this situation, in this scenario. If the cat, of course, because cats are not herbivores, so they have to eat meat in order to survive. So it's their nature. So But of course, to me, it's better to euthanize them, but I'm not gonna euthanize them by myself, because as Glynos said, I have not much information about euthanasia, and I do not know about the process. So if there's no specific clinic to do so, of course not. Regarding materialism and EFILism, yeah, of course, I think that there is a relation, because we live in a materialistic world, and I do think that there is a relation, if I answered your question.
Is it like a core tenet of, or is this just something that seems related? Like, do I have to be a naturalist or a materialist to be an EFIList?
All right.
Yeah,
I'll leave it for someone else to answer. I don't know.
well, the opposite of materialism is idealism, right? So where everything you think just your mind is the only thing that exists. And I think that's like the main difference between Schopenhauer and like in Mendham, is that that's a really core difference, because idealism was really common, you know, back when Schopenhauer was writing, and now, you know, the utilitarians are primarily materialistic. You know, the world exists outside of our perception.
Yeah.
And I'll add maybe something that sounds extremely arrogant. I think EFILists, we kind of look around and we try to find as much of the bullshit as possible, right? And so we see gods and we think, okay, that's obvious bullshit. We see astrology and we think, okay, that's obvious bullshit. And we see that it's okay to eat other animals because we are top of the food chain, and we look at that and we think, okay, that's bullshit. Question of free will, which I know is coming up, you consider the ramifications of living in a deterministic universe, and you think, I don't see there's any room for free will in this deterministic universe, so maybe that's kind of bullshit too. So yeah, and then the final one is like, isn't life great? Why? Because I'm addicted to it, and it feels good sometimes, and I'm afraid of dying, therefore I have to convince myself that life is good. So I think in that sense, a lot of those themes are related in that, and you know, trying to be as humble as possible. Is it possible that we're wrong? Sure, theoretically. But I think the point of EFILism is kind of trying to strip away all of the illusions and delusions that we have about life, and to see what's left objectively. Now, we know in philosophy that there are all sorts of problems with how do you measure what, or how do you define what's really objectively true, and so on, and so much stuff in epistemology and metaethics and metaphysics and so on. But to answer the question, does a person have to be a physicalist or a materialist to be an EFIList? No, they could still theoretically come to the conclusion that life is a horribly horrific, unwinnable game, and therefore it's better not to make new beings and to look for an exit strategy, while still believing, you know, they could theoretically believe that an evil demon created this torture, which seems far more realistic than a benevolent God. So there's nothing that disqualifies a non-physicalist from being an EFIList. I would just find it difficult to maintain a conversation with them.
Thanks. Amanda, any comments on that?
No, I mean, I just would have to agree with what Glynos said. I mean, I don't really know why somebody of a non-materialist persuasion would be interested in EFILism per se. I mean, maybe anti-natalism, because I think anti-natalism does, it really does go across the board as to who that can attract. But yes, I would agree that, you know, anything, even if what we're existing as are all illusions. I mean, Gary always brings up the quote from Einstein. It's like, you know, time is an illusion, but it's a hell of an illusion. So, I mean, these are all the illusions that we regularly wake up to every day. So even if that's all it is, that's what we best know to exist. And yeah, so I think, but I would agree that a big part of, I don't know, the EFIList mindset is stripping away where these, you know, unbelievable, phantasmagorical things exist within our psychologies and yeah, perceptions.
Yeah, just to add more to what Glynos was saying, I'm not sure if this is a new term or it's an old term. There's a term that says, like, the word itself, it's misotheism or misotheist. Being a misotheist is the person who believes that there is a supernatural power, there is a God, but that this God is evil and he's against that God, and like they see that this God is the devil. So I think that it makes sense to be an EFIList, but not a materialist at the same time.
I will say I don't know that I've ever met an EFIList that is anything other than coming from a materialist standpoint. They might be out there, but I haven't met any.
Is the ultimate value ethically about pleasures and pains? Is that what is of value under a type of hedonic negative utilitarian view within EFILism?
So I mentioned before that I have some moral sensibilities about things like slandering the death, where I'm against it because it's kind of against my moral intuition. And I think with any theory of ethics, I've noticed that, you know, in philosophical literature or just with debates online, that you can kind of invent a trolley problem, or you can create a hypothetical dilemma which calls into question a person's consistency with their beliefs. I put greater value on hedonism. I do think that pain and relief of pain, or some people might call it pleasure, are the most pressing issues. But, you know, that's not to say that therefore I can be undone by saying, oh, well, is it okay if somebody cheats on their partner, but the partner never finds out? You're saying that's okay because there's no negative consequence. Again, I think, you know, I could discuss that for a long time, and about, again, the wider ramifications on society of having people who cheat on their partners. Is that more likely then to lead to more negative consequences? And the other person could come back and say, well, what if you knew for certain that they would never create any negative consequences? And I don't really have a question. I don't really have an answer to that question. My focus is primarily on hedonism, about pain is bad, not creating pain is better than creating pain. That's where my focus is, but I don't close the door on anything else being, you know, like objectivist theory or desire fulfillment theories that aren't connected to hedonistic principles. I'm not ruling those things out as being valuable. I still maintain that no matter how you cash out ethics, that EFILism is the answer to the problems. So yeah, I primarily focus on hedonism, but I'm not closing the door on other things having value.
Anybody else have any commentary on that? One of the tenets I've heard of EFILism is that pleasure is merely the cessation of pain. How can we experience a lot of joy from a pleasant surprise when we have been in a neutral state without any discernible pains?
Well, I think the thinking is that you have to already be in a state of lack of something to be able to appreciate the relief of having the thing that's bringing you joy. So food tastes good because you're hungry. You're in a negative, hunger is the negative state, and food brings that happiness. You're always you can't really appreciate the relief of a burden until you have the burden in the first place. I think that's the general thinking behind that. Probably didn't answer your question too satisfactorily.
Yeah, I'll jump into, and you mentioned this, like, oh, the joy of a surprise, but we know, like, the best surprises, if you think of like people throwing surprise birthday parties for people, the lengths to which people go to make people feel like, oh, everyone's forgotten your birthday. Everyone's forgotten your birthday. No one, and you know, they set up these elaborate plans to make people feel as shit as possible, so that the surprise then has greater benefit. I'm very interested, and this is something that whenever I ask people about this, one of my strategies when I'm debating with people is to kind of put the things on the scales, right? I'll put the bad stuff on the scales, you put the good stuff on the scales, and let's see which one wins. And I always encounter resistance to that. I never ever get the right answer. Only, oh, you can't quantify positive and negative experiences. Well, yeah, you might not be able to put a number on it, but for sure you can say that some things are bad in a way that the good things are not good. And just the idea that it's like a pleasant surprise. Well, okay, I'm looking at like cancer and heart disease and being eaten alive and, you know, having chronic depression and chronic pain. And then like, oh, what about the pleasure of a nice surprise? So even I understand that what you're trying to think of an example of a pleasure which isn't associated to a lack of suffering. Sorry, a lack of the presence of suffering. But I don't know. When I think of all of my pleasant experiences, all of my pleasurable experiences, if I dig deep enough, I can always find that it's against a backdrop of some negative state, no matter what it is, right? If it's listening to music, which I'm a big fan of, or watching comedy or playing chess or something like this, I can always find in my mind somewhere that, okay, this is solving this problem that I have. Now, when you flip that and you think of chronic illness, you can't think of it in the same way that like, oh, I see that this chronic illness is just like, it's a lack of pop music in my life. It's just not in the same way. So the question, like, can something positively exist? I would question that, but more important thing that I want to say is that it's far more meaningful. The negative sensations are far more meaningful. And the best and most pleasurable experiences that I think we can ever have are the ones that relieve suffering. Are there any on top of that, any aesthetic things like the nice taste of food over like eating tasty food over insipid food, or listening to, I don't know, Beethoven over Justin Bieber? No offense, Oldphan. That, you know, is there something slightly pleasurable on top of that that could qualify as being something? Well, if it does exist, it doesn't exist for me in any meaningful sense. And certainly if I was trading off negative things for positive things, I can't find anything that would be worth trading. I can't think of anything that would say like, okay, you can experience X if, you know, 7-year-old girl gets cancer. No, nothing.
Any other? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I've talked about this on my channel that, you know, Sam Harris has this idea of pleasure and pain on the moral landscape, and he thinks there's some Mount Everest of pleasure on the moral landscape, and I just don't see that, because the negatives are always going to drag you back down. So I'd just like to quote from someone who written a little bit more eloquently than I can. I think he's Lord Satan X from the EFILism wiki. I'll just read what he says. It's kind of a nice paragraph called Ultimate Fragility. Positives are a fragile, temporary perception that you can never hold on to, while negatives are the hard reality that will smash and destroy positives permanently. The maximum possible positives cannot contest the worst negatives, but the worst negatives can always destroy the best positives. Example, compare a chainsaw attack, collapsed building, earthquake, asteroid, and just keep scaling it upward to any piece of bliss or any amount of bliss that could ever be produced. And notice it's impossible to ever party your way out of a disaster. Negatives are objectively and universally stronger than positives. Positives are at all times just waiting to be shattered.
Yeah, very well said, Lifex. To add to that, things that we experience on a daily basis, for example, having the need to use the toilet, to go to the bathroom, like we're in a negative state that we need to go and use the toilet. And once we're done, we feel that feeling of pleasure, that like there's a burden that is not there anymore. So I see it that this pleasure is because now the need is absent. There's no need anymore. So that's why we gain this pleasure. It's not because there is pleasure in the first place. It's because the need we had to get rid of, or we had to fulfill, is done. The mission is accomplished. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well or not, but yeah, I hope that the message is delivered. And Arthur Schopenhauer said once, I'm not sure if this is the exact quote or not, that pain always outweighs pleasure in life. And if you do not believe it, like try to imagine one animal eating the other. Like the pleasure of this animal eating that animal and the pain of that animal being eaten.
And I think this does go to, part of what Gary talks about being, built to be motivated and not satisfied, that it just by design, we're really not built to be, we're built to have the whip motivate us, but nothing that we can, we're really not built for any sort of ultimate satisfaction. It's just, it's really kind of not in the cards. Sorry.
Pleasure
That
is
makes
temporary
sense.
at best.
Yeah, that makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint too. If you were naturally selecting for characteristics, you'd want them to be motivated, not kind of sitting on their laurels and being satisfied. I'm curious, Mark, when you designed this question, you gave the example of the pleasant surprise as being an example of pleasure which comes from a neutral state, not from the presence of a negative backdrop. What was your thinking in choosing a pleasant surprise? And were there any other candidates for a pleasant experience which exist without the backdrop of a negative?
Someone submitted that question, but for me, I can think about like a friend popping by for a visit. That'd be nice.
And you can't think of how that might satisfy a need or a negative?
No, like I'm fine right
You've
now.
been in isolation for a full year.
Yeah, but I'm talking to like 4 of you guys. Like the like if someone popped by now, it'd just add more pleasure to my life. I mean, pandemic aside, but because like a lot of people think about like these pleasures that are physical, like having ice cream or I don't know, playing a video game or whatever. But what about meaningful friendships and spending time with 5 friends instead of 4? Like I don't see how that is coming from a deprivation.
I think what we're basically saying though is that you're starting out in need of that, and if you're having that experience, whether it be a surprise or what have you, it's filling that need. But needs are suffering, essentially. I mean, that's when you're creating a human being, you're starting needs that don't need to exist, and those are one of them. I mean, it might be a far less much more benign need to have a friend than have food. I mean, it's a much easier solved on the scale of suffering to remedy, but you're still starting for a place where you need that.
Yeah, it's that burden of the pack animal part of us that's in our DNA. Like a lot of ways I'd love to just be alone all the time, but I just know it's not healthy. I get so depressed going without human communication. To me, that's a burden on us that we have to seek it out.
Yeah, I hate people stopping by at my flat, by the way, so I can't identify with that. But also, I just think like there must be so many like little subconscious psychological things of like, oh, well, I hope this person's okay. I hope this person's doing well. I haven't spoken to this person in a while. I feel guilty about not communicating with them a little bit, or maybe there's something I should have said last time when I saw this person, and then they show up. And this, whether it's on a conscious or a subconscious level, is I at least in my own psychology, that's how I would see it. Of like, well, it is pleasant to see them. I don't feel like I'm in desperate need to see this person right now, but the fact that it is pleasurable to see those people, I think, if I dig far enough into my psychology, I could understand that it's like, oh yeah, maybe I need validation, or I care about that person and I want to, make them happy or have a chat about something, and that adds extra pleasure. I just think that if I dig far enough in there, I can see that it's meeting some need that I have.
Okay. I've heard EFILists say they are determinists. What is EFILists' view on free will? Is this a core tenet as well? Jump in when
I've already given my point of view, so I'll let someone else.
Okay, I'll call people. Amanda, you go first, and then Life Sucks, Laith, and then Glynos again.
I mean, I believe it's a deterministic universe. This is not really a subject that I'm particularly articulate in. It just seems like reality doesn't really have a place for free will anywhere. I can't really see how that works out. It just seems quite obvious that we're in the process of watching dominoes knock into each other. more than anything else. So yeah, I apologize. I can't really answer it more articulately than that, but it just seems like that's far more the nature of the universe than anything we're going to call a free will.
Thanks.
It's kind of like that materialism question. Like, it'd be hard to imagine an EFIList who's a theist or someone into free will. I mean, these are just wrong perspectives. They're just wrong. I mean, there is no free will. It's been proven scientifically. You know, we know that they've done tests that your brain fires before you are consciously aware of it by about a half a second. It's just not true. And same with a God. There's no God. You know that. So to me, I think that is pretty important part of EFILism. It'd just be kind of hard to have a Christian EFIList, but maybe there is one. I don't know.
We're like all performing an unseen script on a stage we don't want to be on.
Yeah.
Leif?
Yeah, so regarding this question, I'm going to read a quote by Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri, and I'm going to translate it to English because it's in Arabic. He says, ما باختياري ميلادي ولا هرمي ولا حياتي فهل لي بعد تخيير, which means I didn't choose my birth nor my aging, not even my life. Do I still have options? So that proves that there's no free will, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, while I agree, I am a hard determinist. I don't think that this Al-Mari quote proves that there's no free will. At least it proves that there are at least some things that we don't choose. I'm a hard determinist. I don't see any room for free will in this world. I do think that it's just like a cosmic game of billiards where, you know, the balls are just running around. But again, the nature of the question, like this, you could ask this of the same thing of like atheists, right? You could say, well, do all atheists have to accept evolution? And are all atheists, do they have to believe in determinism or not? Now, the working definition of atheist is someone who isn't convinced by arguments that suggest that there is a God, and kind of in a similar vein, the definition of EFIList is someone who thinks that life is a horrific show and is the sentient beings are better off never coming into existence, and if we can find a safe way for them to exit, we should go and do that. Everything else is possible. Right on top of that, we can keep asking, like, do they have to be vegan, or do they have to be hard determinists, or do they have to be atheists, and do they have to believe in evolution? Theoretically, no, but according to what I would say is the spirit of EFILism, which, as I mentioned earlier, is stripping back delusional thinking, I would say at least a good EFIList would again, I don't know if someone, I've tried to understand what compatibilism is for about the last 5 years of my life, because I've never heard a good explanation of compatibilism, that we can live in a deterministic universe and still this can be compatible with free will. I don't see any room for free will personally, but there's nothing in the definition that disqualifies people who believe in it from being EFIList.
I still think there's value in trying to find out the core tenets, because how am I supposed to discern whether or not a person's an EFIList or not? So like atheists talk about the problem of evil. Fine, all atheists are now EFILists. That doesn't make sense. I need to find out what are your core beliefs, and how do I determine what is EFILism and what isn't. That's why I'm trying to get to the core tenets of this stuff.
Yeah, I just don't know how relevant something, I don't know. So my answer would be then, yeah, fine, someone could believe in free will. I would think that they are absolutely wrong about free will, but they could still be EFILists.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark, just to comment on on what Glynis was saying, and we discussed this before with Amanda, as I remember, for not being vegan and an EFIList at the same time.
You're jumping
I
ahead.
still do not agree. I'm jumping ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm just joking.
Yeah, so even though the founder of EFILism, Gary Emandam, said that you do not have to be a vegan in order to be an EFIList, but I still see that there's a contradiction here, because as I said before, by not being vegan, you're actually contributing to breed these animals on a daily basis. And especially that if you know that, and if you're aware about what's going on, So it doesn't make any sense to me to bring more suffering to this world as an EFIList.
Right. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think he's mentioned that some people just are having a hard time breaking their addiction, you know, so like they can believe in the philosophy, but don't promote it, you know, don't try to defend it in any way.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I'll be quick. I mean, I think a big part of EFILism is recognizing and allowing people to vocalize where they are addicted. It's not about punishing the addict. You know, we as individual people are going to fail. That's part of being human. We may fail in various ways, but I think at least being able to articulate those addictions and being able to articulate ethics, not necessarily being perfect vessels of them, is where he's putting more importance. I mean, it's unfortunately what happens to a lot of people when they're not able to perform veganism or be vegan, is that they go completely backwards in the shit that comes out of their mouth too. They're all of a sudden not able to articulate anything about animal ethics or, I mean, there has to be more onus about what the future is going to look like, not what the individual can become. I think that's of more important. I mean, it's great when people can become vegan. People should become vegan if they want to be logically consistent. EFILists, they should be vegans. There's no pressure being put on other EFILists to like an EFIList that isn't a vegan or something, or to excuse them necessarily. But I also think that, yeah, I think that the level to which this philosophy gives people at least the ability to express ethics, not necessarily to be able to be the embodiment of those ethics themselves, is it's a much greater part of this than people give it credit for.
Yeah,
so I mean, somebody could be believe in free will, but you know, they could basically admit they have a psychological addiction to believing this is the way the world works. But if they can articulate that, yeah, it's probably it's probably more of a deterministic universe, I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with that. People have their psychological hang-ups.
I do understand what you mean, Amanda, but if we're gonna justify this by saying that people are addicted to animal products, so we can justify any other immoral act like procreation with other words, for example. The thing is that, for example, I cannot preach a vasectomy if I haven't done it for myself. So once I have done it, I started preaching vasectomy, because people are gonna ask you have you done vasectomy? How come you're preaching something that you haven't done? It doesn't make any sense. So even if you believe that it's true, you should at least apply it and then start talking about it. But if you're not applying it, like, what's the point? That's how I see it. But yeah, I understand
the point is that it might affect somebody else to make better choices than you're able to. That the words and the people that's going to create, or the behavior that's going to create in the future, is more important than the behaviors that you're able to perform yourself.
Yeah, that's an advantage. But how do we expect from others to be better if we ourselves are not making an effort?
It's tricky. I mean, hopefully through our effort, there won't be the people to have these problems, right? I mean, but yeah, no, it's a, I mean, but yeah, I mean, I will say for personally, that was the fact that I was able to be somebody that wasn't quite perfect in their, you know, it was very difficult for me to become vegan. It was very difficult for me to become, to even go vegetarian for a long time. I mean, I struggled with it for more time than I'm comfortable with saying. Does that mean that I shouldn't have been vocalizing EFILism? Does that mean I shouldn't have made the EFIList? I don't think so. It got a lot of people to at least think along these lines. And then, yeah, it took me a longer period of time to catch up with my own ethics. I just don't think we're achieving anything good from being able to articulate ethical positions, even if they themselves are not able to do them themselves. I just don't think that we're getting anywhere by having that perspective. That's just my personal opinion.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with both. I think that a person is more persuasive if they kind of live by their actions. So, you know, if they're promoting having a vasectomy and there's not a good reason not to get it done, get it done. If they are promoting veganism and animal rights, they should go vegan. It's more persuasive. But like, I totally agree with what Amanda says too, that arguments stand on their own merits. And if you can present a case as to why one should or shouldn't do something, whether that person, the speaker, the conductor of that argument, whatever they do doesn't take anything away from the argument. Although, yeah, arguments are more persuasive if you're able to live by those actions.
Definitely. Yeah.
Can you please explain the acronym CRAP or CRCA? Anybody?
Who wants to take it? I'll take. So it's either consumption, reproduction, cannibalism, addiction, or oh my god,
Consumption, reproduction,
addiction,
addiction,
parasitism. Yeah. So I mean, that was changed in the middle of my making the EFIList. So the old version is still in the film, and it's not the acronym crap. And it's basically the understanding that you know, we're feeding off of each other. I mean, cannibalism and consumption are related. I mean, highly, I would say, but that we're designed to consume, we're designed to reproduce on an island planet where we cannibalize each other. And that on top of it, we are these, basically the biggest feature of our psychology is this addiction thing. That we're driven to be need machines, that we're driven to be insatiable, that we're, you know, that's basically the biggest, one of the biggest features psychologically of what we are, is this, you know, these insatiable need machines. And that's, I think addiction does put that well into one word. So it's just it's an acronym meant to basically be a short overview, a short statement about what we are as living things on this planet.
Any other thoughts? Normative ethics. So I've already asked this, but if you have any more commentary, is EFILism's normative theory negative utilitarianism? Is it a certain brand of negative utilitarianism, hedonic negative utilitarianism? Did you guys have any other comments on that, or we can move on?
I came across EFILism actually before I came across negative utilitarianism. And when I started going through negative utilitarianism, I identified a lot with it. I should be more well-read than I am on the subject. I did study philosophy at university, believe it or not. But yeah, I don't see any major difference, but I'm also absolutely sure that people who are more educated in philosophy, probably Matt, Lath, and probably even Amanda, might find a difference in there. But for me, no.
Yeah, I mean, for my part, I don't know enough to say really one way or the other. I think that's what it mostly fits into. I think that's the glove that most fits. But EFILism wasn't created really with knowledge of negative utilitarianism, as far as I know. I think quite a lot of EFILists don't really come to EFILism with a prior knowledge of negative utilitarianism. But I do think that that's what most fits of what I've seen. I don't know if Life Sucks and Lath feel differently.
I do agree with what you said, Amanda.
Any other comments, Life Sucks?
Oh, no.
Okay. Red button. What is the red button? What is the difference between the red button and the benevolent world explorer thought experiment within negative utilitarian discourse? Yeah. Let's go with Life Sucks, Lath, Glynos, and then Amanda. I'm just randomly picking now.
What is the red button scenario?
Yeah, what is the red button? What is the difference between the red button and the benevolent world explorer thought experiment within NU discourse?
I think they're the same thing. Just that, you know, the graceful exit, kind of a similar thing that, you know, the difference between, I think, EFILism and other forms of ethics or activist ethics or anti-natalism is it's a criticism of the game. The game is the problem. And the game is just brutal and terrible, and it should be ended as soon as possible. And that's really what it's about, because it prevent you know, that pound of prevention, it prevents so much harm in the future. I mean, even just the next year of suffering, how much pain and suffering is going to be caused on this planet. You know, it's just a conclusion of negative utilitarianism. You just can't really avoid it. If suffering is bad, we should get rid of it.
Leif?
Yeah, I do agree with what LifeSucks said. The red button is pushing this button in order to seek a graceful exit for every single sentient being on this in this universe, whether they're humans, animals, insects, or whatever, even bacteria maybe. And yeah, the problem is with the game itself, as LifeSucks said, and I see no difference.
Lars?
Yeah, so it's on the face of it, it's a horrifying thought, right? The idea that you're going to do something and it's going to kill everybody. And we think about the people we know and the history that we have and the cultures that we've built and so on. On the face of it, it looks terrible. But if you consider the opposite, if you consider what is happening, and I mentioned this right at the beginning, we have no way of even like a one trillionth of the problem of even getting close to comprehending just how bad life is. Not that it can be or that it was or that it will be, but every day on this planet, like even if we just think about humans in one country, that every day is going to be the worst day of someone's life, that they're going to find out that, I don't know, they have a terminal illness, or worse, that their child has a terminal illness, or that someone's been raped, or someone's been, I don't know, molested, or something's gone on, and then you extend that to the wild suffering, and it really is a pressing issue, and it's difficult. I don't know what goes on in other people's minds, but it's, for me, it's really hard to believe how people find it acceptable, that they look and they check the news and say, oh, isn't it awful every day? Isn't it awful? Oh, isn't it awful? Oh, isn't it awful? Like, you can just open any news website and just see tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. So, like, the red button is certainly, you know, if we think of it in the alphabet, it's the Z, right? And we are kind of needing to go through the A's and the B's and the C's and the D's. And if you approach someone with the Z, and this is why I don't like speaking about the red button too much, particularly when I'm first engaging in people, because if you start off and your position is something like, yeah, my goal is to kill all people or to end all lives. Again, I have no interest in ending people's lives. What I have an interest in is stopping suffering. And so those are the conversations that I like having. First of all, trying to explain why bad things are bad, trying to explain why not coming into existence cannot be bad for any sentient being. And from there, once we get that grounding, once those things become axioms, which they're not, once they become axioms, then we can start thinking and talking about red buttons. But yeah, I'm very aware that people are massively uncomfortable with the idea of red buttons, but they are not as uncomfortable with the idea of the red button as I am with the idea of letting this shit continue for, I don't know, thousands, hundreds, thousands, millions more years.
Amanda?
So I just want to say first off that I have not read Karl Popper, is that his name? So I'm not as familiar with that version of, although I know that's the origins of it. I'm not as familiar with that version of the thought experiment. So I don't know firsthand, you know, how they might differ. I will say that there are many versions of the red button thought experiment too. And that kind of gets a little messy in having this conversation, because I constantly feel like I'm, you know, I can say the red button, but people have one idea of what that might be, and I might have another, and that does get a little complicated. But it's a thought experiment. I think it is a very useful thought experiment in getting people to have a conversation about extinction, to conceptualize kind of the emergency of life on planet Earth, to kind of get people to just think of the value of such a large problem that could be taken care of instantly. I think is an interesting and useful conversation, because this is, in reality, this is not an easy problem to fix. It is something that does not exist. It is something that most likely will never exist. I do think it has utility in the conversation. I also think it is, it's a little bit like the consent argument too, where I think people get so hung up on it that it loses its utility at times. Yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say about it.
Thanks.
What you're looking for, yeah.
Someone submitted a question. How does EFILism ground an obligation to end all sentient life?
Well, I think it will end. Like it is going to end at some point. I think extinction is an inevitability. And I think that we can see that natural extinction has every potential to be really awful. And as the only creatures on, I mean, we've said it pretty much all earlier in this conversation, as the only creatures on planet Earth to have ever existed, to, you know, to have that had any potential of maybe trying to lessen the badness of that experience, that should be within our, again, at the very least, I think it's our responsibility to have that conversation of how extinction can be better and not worse.
Thanks. Anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I only have a question. How bad would it need to get for non-EFILists before they realize that someone who's capable of making a decision should make a decision? Like, what? How is there? Do they have a threshold, or is it simply that no amount of suffering would cross that threshold? And if it's no amount, then can a person really say that they have genuine, legitimate interests in preventing harm?
Maybe I'll get a response video with that. Any other thoughts? Okay. Thought experiment versus responsibility. After talking to multiple EFILists, some have said that the red button is just a thought experiment. Some believe extinction is not practical, or it's just wishful thinking. And then some have said we have a responsibility to bring about total extinction, an extinction plan, a graceful exit. What are your views on that? Those two differences? Let's go with
yes. I do believe that it's our moral obligation and our responsibility to work on achieving this, to end this life for everyone painlessly. But I do not think that it's practical, and I do not think that I cannot make sure that after this event, no life will pop up again and again, because, as you know, evolution, this is the problem with the evolution itself, that I cannot be sure that I can guarantee the extinction of every single sentient being in this universe. It doesn't, it's not practical to me.
Life sucks, Amanda, and then Glynos.
Well, I think Gary said this many times that, we're going to go extinct, and all life on Earth is going to extinct at some time. So why should we let it stay messy? We should try to guide it into a more graceful exit. I think it'd be irresponsible not to. So I think it's more than a thought experiment.
Amanda?
I think that the red button, for the most part, is a thought experiment. I think that where it maybe is not a thought experiment is sort of at the end. Like, we're all anti-natalists. I get the, let's do anti-natalism. Let's prevent lives. Let's get human beings to extinction. But I think that the trouble comes in when we're talking about the animals. I don't really, based on what Mendham has said, David Benatar has said, other people have said, I don't really think that you can fix the problem entirely through sterilization. And then, but I'm all for finding whatever methods are best. And I don't have, all the answers or good answers to all of that, which is why, again, I want this to be, a massive human conversation. I mean, Mendham always kind of likens it to, the biggest Manhattan Project, human beings have ever tried to achieve. That's something on that kind of scale, trying to find out what the best ethical approach is to sentient extinction, I think would be the best outcome for life on this planet, quite frankly. How to lay it down gently as opposed to hard, I think would be like, the highest form of what our civilization could produce, pretty much. I mean, in the end, it is, well, I'll just say that, I think that where a red button idea might have some real world application, again, is in this question of what do you have to do in order for it to not come back. So do you have to get rid of the planet in the end? Do you have to devise something that would make sure that the planet isn't there for consciousness to reemerge again, if that's possible? And again, I don't have all the answers to that, but no, I do think that it's we're in this state of perpetual hospice basically right now, and I think we're basically making a sentient wide right to die argument essentially.
Thanks, Linos.
Yeah, I have nothing major to add, only to repeat the point that Matt made, that we are going extinct whether we like it or not, and that we have the option: do we allow it to go extinct in an incredibly messy fashion, which will cause far more damage and pain and harm than a graceful exit? And I think I can't see any argument that would justify why we would allow it to go the messy route if we have the possibility to do it a graceful way. And I'm very interested in the non-EFIList's point of view on this. Like, what do they want? Are they content with the idea of just letting things play out? Like, humans, as it looks like we are not going to convince the world not to have children, that climate change will destroy us all, that humans will go extinct, whether it's in the next 200 or maybe 20,000 years. But it looks like humans have, fucked up their stuff well enough to guarantee human extinction. And then what are we faced with the prospect of? Like, the sun's going to be around for 5 billion more years. Do we want another, like, 2 billion years of just things eating each other? Like, is that how could anyone who pretends or claims to care about suffering think that that's acceptable?
It's not acceptable, but we don't have that possibility. There is no red button. So, like, we're kind of left with the consequentialist point of view that you are going to have to let it linger and die out until there is a possible solution.
Yeah, there's the question over should we do it, right? And can we do it? Now, can we do it? Again, I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable.
But ought would imply can, right? Or maybe it's the opposite of that. But like, you could make the case if the option's there, but we don't have that option unless you argue for nukes, which people have argued for.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. From my point of view, I would think that first of all, you have the question, should we do it, before you have the question, can we do it? I do think that, of course, if some things are clearly impossible, then maybe there isn't a great amount of value on discussing ought a person do it or ought a person not do it. But I think the red button certainly seems at least theoretically achievable. How one would go about doing it, again, I am terribly sorry, but I'm not the right person to ask. And I'm curious as to what the non-EFIList anti-natalist position is, because I haven't spoken to too many of them about this subject. I don't know if they are okay, because I know that some anti-natalists that I've spoken to are very much just misanthropic, right? They don't like humans and they think that humans should die out, and maybe with good reason misanthropic. But then they believe that nature is wonderful and Gaia is wonderful, and that there's a natural order and Mother Nature will take care of everything. Once humans are gone, the problem will be solved. I'm curious for those anti-natalists. Like, are they content with that outcome?
Okay.
I don't get. Can I just add something?
Yeah.
I don't get the sense, at least recently, that most antinatalists are even okay with human extinction. It seems to be sort of, even that is up for huge contention. So I don't know. It's confusing to me.
Yeah, it seems illogical because obviously not breeding would lead to extinction.
That it's a consequence but not a goal. But to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
There's just a lot of anti-natalists and just people who are just life lovers.
Yeah, but they would more likely agree with human extinction than all life extinction. So that's what we know. The thing is that even if we can do it, the world's governments and the people who control and have the power in this world are not going to let us do it. And they are the ones who have the authority. It's because, you know, they're making a lot of profit, a lot of money from human resources, and the more you breed, the better for them. Because you're paying taxes, you're going to work, you're working as a slave in this capitalist world. So why would they end it? For them, it's heaven, and they're enjoying it, and they're so selfish. So they wouldn't let you do it. And who are we to be able to do it? Because unfortunately, we're individuals. We do not have the power.
So what's the goal?
So yeah, this is the problem.
You're all extinctionists, but saying it's not practical.
Well, I don't know that it's completely impractical. I think it's impractical for solo agents. I think it's unethical for solo agents to attempt such a thing. But I'm quite confident in the should part. I think human beings should, at the very least, make this a point of conversation, that we have all of this, mental power. And I think we do have this responsibility. If there is a practical way of doing it, I think it should be done. But that's not. See, I mean, Mark, you're always saying that there's no harm in saying that you don't know. I think when EFILists say that we don't know, we don't necessarily know how to achieve it. That's kind of seen as like, I don't know, a trick, or it's interpreted in some very strange ways. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I'm just saying that I don't always feel at liberty to say the parts that I don't know. And I don't know them, but I do think that this is an important thing for people to consider at the very least. I do think that the should is. I don't understand really how the should part could be argued with.
Do any of you contest the point made by Amanda about we have like a type of, correct me if I'm wrong here, that we have a responsibility to have this conversation? And if there is no point of contention, where is the conversation? I don't see, and is the conversation with other EFILists, other antinatalists, or the general public? Which conversation?
You're talking about phased extinction now?
Yeah, phased extinction, sure, yeah.
What is the conversation you're saying? If we're not coming up with a practical plan, you mean?
No, I think you can not have a practical plan, but you're trying to make the case first that we should do something, right? Mm-hmm. And to be fair, you did go to those college students and you talked about this.
And I made a movie.
You made a movie. Yeah, but that's not conversation, right? Like that's promoting the idea, but to talk to people about it, to have face-to-face conversation, to have argument, counter-argument, papers going back and forth. I don't see that yet.
Well, it's, this has only been around 8 years. I mean, and I think part of the difficulty of this argument warrants artistic methods to maybe kind of come first, because I just don't think there's much utility in just sitting people down and just laying it all out in hard language at this point. I think people do need, unfortunately, a spoonful of sugar to be able to engage with a lot of these ideas. And you've seen what happens, Mark. You've seen what happens when people try to talk about
I've seen
these
it
things.
from, it's quite
aggressive.
That's the disappointment, is that some of these questions did come from anti-EFILists. And Glynos, when I asked you to come on the panel, you're like, is any anti-EFIList going to be on there? It would help the conversation. I don't consider myself an EFIList, so I could only go so far. But I'm getting these things through proxy, so I can't really expand too much on the questions. But they're very concerned about some of these questions, and they want to like have this dialogue. But at the same time, Some people make it personal. Some people are just insulting one another. And I just don't see any conversation actually happening, even though both sides are like, hey, we want to have a conversation. And I'm like, well, how is that possible?
So yeah, when I talk about like it's important to have the conversation, I don't mean between antinatalists and EFILists. I mean the conversations that I have with people are just to try to promote not creating bad situations for other sentient beings, right? So I'm in my private life, I'm kind of trying to convince people to go vegan, or trying to convince people of the benefits of veganism, or trying to just nibble away at people and to express, where reasonably possible, ideas of pessimistic philosophy, not necessarily EFILism or antinatalism immediately, just promoting pessimism, just trying to open people's eyes to the idea that things are terrible. In terms of where we're going with this, I think there is a difference between like political activism and holding a philosophical belief. And I know you asked the question earlier about like, do we have a responsibility to do it? And Leith is certainly like all for like, yeah, we have a responsibility to end it as soon as possible. But as just someone who accepts the philosophy, I just look at it and think like, okay, yeah, these arguments support the idea that life is terrible and that creating a graceful exit is better than not creating a graceful exit. In terms of being an EFIList, while I might not be the most productive EFIList, I think that's what makes me an EFIList. The fact that, yeah, these are opinions that I share, these are points of view on the world that I agree with, and that's what makes me an EFIList. So asking like, well, what's your end goal, or what are you doing? I mean, you could ask that like to a feminist. Okay, feminist, what's your end goal? Or to a men's rights activist, what's your end goal? Them not having an end goal doesn't make them not feminists or not men's rights activists. So vegans who don't know how to go about replacing the industry of animal agriculture with another industry, that doesn't make them less.
They don't have a
vegan.
method, but they have a goal. Like they don't want the enslavement of other animals. That's the goal. They don't know the method. I mean, there's multiple theories of how to go about it, but there's still a goal there.
Yeah, I mean, and our goal, of course, is that we will live in a world. Oh, sorry, we will live in a world. Terribly sorry. There will be no sentient beings who have to be tortured. That's the goal. That's the ideal situation.
Would there be like a timeline for, or is that even too far-fetched to ask?
I would say no, but I'll be quiet.
It's something I would like to explore in my channel in the future, like especially science fiction works that have explored this topic, which there have been many. And yeah, I think it'd probably be done in phases. You know, like first we get rid of the predators and then the prey, and just maybe work continent to continent, something like that.
Yeah, I think the idea of a timeline is like, I think about that all the time, and without that kind of structure, yeah, I mean, some of these conversations are a bit hard to have, but so I think that's a great thing to conceptualize for sure in the future. Yeah.
Leith, did you have anything else to say before I go into another question? What is the connection with EFILism and antinatalism? Are EFILists also antinatalists? Would there be a scenario that would be okay to procreate? Let's go with Life Sucks, Amanda, Leith, and then Glenos.
Yeah, I guess it'd be hard to imagine an EFIList who's not an antinatalist. You know, it's just kind of an enhanced form of antinatalism, but there are these antinatalists who don't care about animals and apply it only to the human race, even though Benatar doesn't. He applies it to everyone. I guess that's all I have to say about that.
I forgot who I said next. I think it's Amanda.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was Leith. Yeah, I really don't see any difference. I don't know of any EFIList that's not an antinatalist. I'm very much an antinatalist. I think it's an enormous part of what this is, and yeah, I'm not sure what else to say either.
Leith?
Yeah, the thing is that some antinatalists say that you do not have to be an EFIList in order to be an antinatalist, but I think you have to be an antinatalist in order to be an EFIList. yeah, as we know, there are a lot of parts of antinatalism, groups of antinatalism, like the voluntary human extinction movement, child free, and so on. So they're not EFILists. But of course, there is a very strong relationship between both philosophies, and one leads to another. So I think that, as Amanda said before, if I'm not mistaken, that EFILism is antinatalism plus. Yeah, and that's it.
Thanks, Glynos.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I see that antinatalism is the conclusion and EFILism is the justification for why or it's the justification for my brand of antinatalism. But that kind of makes me, I don't know, antinatalism, is it a philosophy? And I don't know if we can ask, what's the difference between antinatalism and EFILism? Because there are so many different types of antinatalism. I know when we use the word antinatalist, most of us, I guess, are talking about Benatarian antinatalism and not China's one-child policy antinatalism. So I think, yeah, maybe a more specific term is needed for antinatalism. But yeah, I think it would be ridiculous to consider an EFIList who decides to have children. But related to the question of whether it's ever justified to have children, I don't know. That's a tough one. I know Benatar has spoken about, in some cases we would need to, if we were to develop some exit strategy, we would need to, it would be justified, not in their interests, but for the interests of others, it would be justified to reproduce. In a practical, like today's world case, I don't see any justification for procreation. In a hypothetical scenario, I could imagine of some cases where it's okay, maybe justifiable, but yeah, I don't know.
Thanks. I've heard the term sentiocentric antinatalism used in EFIList's commentary. What does that mean? And what's the difference between EFIList sentiocentric antinatalism and Benatarian sentiocentric antinatalism? Let's go with Amanda, Laith, Lifesucks, and Glynos.
I mean, this is a tough one to answer. And I want to say first off that I'm not really sure what the origin of this term is. I don't know if anybody here does. I don't know if Benatar is the one that coined it. I feel like the first time I saw it was actually one of Magnus Vinding's books, but I could be wrong about that. I think sometimes the term is meant to be another way of saying EFIList, basically, without having to, get EFILism on your hands, so to speak. I think it's sometimes a way of describing Benatarian antinatalism for those that will admit that Benatar makes space for the animals as well. It's definitely a way of, saying this is the opposite of more of a vehement position, an anthropocentric position. I don't really know what to say about it. I mean, I think there is some disagreement about what sort of it applies to, whether when you say you're a sentiocentric antinatalist, does that mean that it's implying that you are for the extinction of all life, or you are somebody that recognizes the suffering of all life, or both? Or it's kind of interesting that it's become sort of its own little position, even though I think in effect it's describing both Benatarian antinatalism and EFILism to some extent. I don't really think that there's much, really all that much difference between these terms, in my opinion.
Yeah, same here. I'm not so familiar with the word, but the thing is that I hate the fact that people come up with new words, for example, for a philosophy that already exists. Like the problem with many people have problem with EFILism is because they hate Emendem himself. Like, you don't have to love the person in order to follow a philosophy that he came up with. You can hate that person and agree with the philosophy. You don't have to like him or to love him. So I still do not understand why this is happening among humans. Like, for example, the word veganism in Arabic, you can say it in many different ways. And there's a guy who came up with a specific word for veganism in Arabic, and now because some people hate him, so they try to come up with other words for veganism just to fight that guy himself. Yeah, I'll leave it to Life Sucks now.
Yeah, I guess sentiocentrism, which values sentience. I mean, that's basically a utilitarian concept that suffering is what has value. And EFILism, clearly, that's where the value is placed. As far as other anti-natalists, can't speak for them. I mean, vehement, they think that humans are the cause of all the problems. So.
Glynos?
Yeah, I watched an interview between Benatar and some famous vegan YouTuber. I forgot his name, and I think it was in this interview where he said that he wouldn't press the red button. I might be confusing it with another one, but I certainly remember Benatar saying something along the lines of that he wouldn't press the red button because humans, even when because of the finality of the situation, he said that sometimes humans, even with the best intentions, they're capable of doing something tragically bad. So that would be the only distinction that I alluded to earlier about the difference between Benatarian antinatalism and EFILism. I don't see any distinction between them other than the point that Matt made that he doesn't pay enough attention to the problem of sentient suffering and blames humans for the downfall of sentient individuals instead of blaming the game of life itself. So there's that distinction, but also I do believe that Benatar's on record saying that he wouldn't press the red button, and so that's another distinction I'd make between Benatarian sentiocentric antinatalism and EFILism.
Thanks. All right, next topic is pro-mortalism. This gets brought up quite a bit over the years. And so my question is, I've seen a lot of people say that EFILism entails pro-mortalism. Does it or does it not? What are your views on pro-mortalism? What is pro-mortalism? How do you define it? Let's go with, I don't know. Let's go with Laith, Glynos, Life Sucks, and Amanda.
So I think pro-mortalism is a term that was coined by Jun Huang. And it's basically saying that it's better to exit this world as soon as possible. Like the sooner you are not here, the better for you. And I do agree with this, but I'm not willing to apply it because I believe that activism is much more important than ending my own life. So if I end my own life, I'm going to end my own suffering. But I believe that there's a moral obligation that is much more important than ending my own life. And that's why I believe activism for anti-natalism, animal rights, and so on is very important because I'm saving much more generations from coming into existence. If I convince only one person in my lifetime to be an anti-natalist, imagine how many generations I'm saving, like from the potential child that is gonna come from that person. So this is a very big achievement to me, and it's much better than applying pro-mortalism. What was the second part of the question? Sorry, Mark.
Sorry. I'll just read it again. I've seen a lot of people say that EFILism entails pro-mortalism. What does it? Does it not? What are your views on pro-mortalism? What is pro-mortalism, and how do you define it? That was all of them.
Yes, I think that EFILism, in a way or another, agrees with pro-mortalism, but for all, not for individuals. So, yeah, and I think I defined pro-mortalism and I explained my views on it.
Next, I forgot who I said next.
I think I was next. I think. Okay. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I struggle with this concept when I think about my own life. So if I ask right now, would you choose to die tomorrow or not? I would choose not to die. Now, I accept that's my own psychological bullshit that's going on in my head. Now, would I be better off? And I accept Late's point that, as a good activist, you could convince more people to do something. But I think that's not really the question that pro-mortalism addresses. So if you compare Benatarian antinatalism, which is it's better never to have been, but when you're here, it's better to continue to exist until you die. Pro-mortalism says it's better never to have been, but once you're here, it's better to get out as soon as possible. Now, when I think of my own life, I mentioned this story earlier, like if I could just be shot in the back of my head. I see advantages to that. I genuinely see advantages. I'm terrified of death. Perhaps I shouldn't be, but I am. I don't want to die, but I can certainly see advantages of just being switched off in the middle of the night. Would I apply that to someone else? Absolutely not. Certainly on an individual basis, I wouldn't. No part of me would ever look at a person and think like, well, I think that they would be better off dying. Therefore, I want to take some action to go about annihilating that person. That's a totally alien concept to me. I don't think, as to the question of whether EFILism entails pro-mortalism, whether one has to be a pro-mortalist if they're an antinatalist, I'd say no more so than if they were a Benatarian antinatalist. I think that's the same question could be asked to to yourself or to other Benatarian antinatalists. With the extinction issue, it is a real dilemma that even if we democratically agree as a human race that we're going to go extinct, we're going to end the planet, and we're all going to have this Manhattan Project to do it. For sure, there will be some people who say, actually, no, I don't want this for myself. Like, you have no right to kill me. And those are legitimate concerns, right? I do not feel comfortable ending a human's life against their will. That seems totally abhorrent to me. So yeah, it's a subject I wrestle with. In short, I'm not a pro-mortalist. I don't consider myself to be a pro-mortalist, although when I think of my own death, I see huge advantages over being switched off tomorrow than living, 30 or 40 more years and living through dementia and Alzheimer's.
Thanks. Life sucks.
Yeah, I guess I always imagine pro-mortalism as a pro-suicide philosophical position. And, Emendum seems to clearly be against suicide for you, unless you're in some terrible pain, because you can actually do something. You can convince more people to be vegans or animal rights activists or antinatalists. So he's like taking you, an aware, awake person who knows the truth out of the game could be a bad thing. So I don't think EFILism is necessarily pro-mortalist.
Thanks, Amanda.
So sorry, I was muted. I've never called myself a pro-mortalist. I'm not a pro-mortalist. I pretty much wholesale reject this term. It's been very interesting though, doing research into it. I mean, I think one of the things that you and I, Mark, have discovered through exploring anti-natalism is that Jawun, in fact, was not the person that coined this term. Benatar had used it prior to, and I still don't know who exactly coined it. Christopher Belshaw, who has written about anti-natalism in relation to pro-mortalism, basically has this sweeping, broad definition of it, which is basically for death. And if that's the definition of pro-mortalism, I think I think it's a little like, as I've said to you, Mark, a number of times, it kind of reminds me of the way people use the term nihilism, where it's like, we're all sort of what's the term, existential nihilists. So like that's a reasonable, way that we can all fall into that term a little bit, but we're not, ethical nihilists or moral nihilists. So it's like, I could see how all of us, maybe in some circumstance or another, if that's going to be the definition of pro-mortalism, are pro-mortalists in some respect or another. Like I based on that interview, he pretty much thinks being a right to die activist is pro-mortalism. Now, I don't think either positions are well served from conflating those two terms. I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this word has become a bit of a pejorative. it's often applied to EFILists as a way of kind of shutting down all conversation, and it's just sort of become this, again, pejorative term for murderer, which I don't really know has been in anybody's conception of what pro-mortalism is, outside of this extremely broad Christopher Belshaw, position. I completely reject the this concept of the speed of pro-mortalism. I think that's what makes this concept a bit dangerous, is that there's this implication that it has to be right away, that if you're at all, I am somebody that does just think that it's a reality on planet Earth that when the living machine is on, you're in harm's way, and when the machine is off, you're out of harm's way. And I just think I don't think that makes me a pro-mortalist. I think that's just reality. I mean, you're either a feeling thing or a not feeling thing, and you're in harm's way, you're not in harm's way. But I totally reject this implication that, as far as like the suicide application of pro-mortalism, it means that you have to do it right this instance. And it doesn't even really seem like most pro-mortalists that I've talked to accept that. I think I'll finish quickly, I promise. But I think there's this concept that somehow, I've seen many people say it, that somehow pro-mortalism is this like, time honored, like, studied, position that's had all this literature and thought attached to it. And I don't see any evidence of that so far at all. I think this is a remarkably new term from what I can gather. And it's interesting that entire, identities are starting to be built around it. Yeah, I don't really know what to make of it. Haven't really met too many EFILists that consider themselves pro-mortalists. Gary has never used the term, as far as I know. So yeah,
Thanks.
I don't think much of it at all.
Do you guys have an extra 30 minutes to keep going? This went longer than I thought it was, but.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I'm good.
I can go 30, and then I'll be done, I think.
Sweet. Okay. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. What are your views on the word or term omnicide? Like, does the red button entail omnicide or not, or is it something else? Anybody that wants to jump in? I don't know.
I mean, strictly speaking, by definition, it is omnicide, right? It's the killing of everything. I think any word with the suffix "side", apart from maybe regicide, has negative connotations to it. And again, I'm just worried about the associations that people would have with it, that they would hear omnicide and they would think, okay, there's a small minority of people who want to kill everybody. And I think that at least that's the association that I have with the term. And I don't think that is a fair reflection of the motivations of EFILists. That, again, going back, the motivation of EFILists is to find a way to prevent harm and to stop harm. So yeah, omnicide, it's an ugly word. I did take some notes on that question, actually. I'm just yeah, and so ultimately I just put that most people think that life is a good idea, and so if you approach them again with the Z of the red button of the omnicide, they're going to be turned off. And I think the best strategy is, again, sorry to repeat, but it's the nature of this type of conversation, that the best strategy is, first of all, to get people to think about wider issues in pessimism. Bad things are bad. It's good to stop harm. Before, you don't want to approach anyone with like, hey, we're all for omnicide, want to join us? I don't think that's effective.
Yeah, it doesn't reflect how I think we actually want to achieve our goals. I mean, it's under the banner of the thought experiment that is often dealt with, sure, but I don't think anybody is saying that as far as what we wish to see happen in some sort of real world application. I'm not for that.
Laith or Life Sucks?
Yeah, to me, it's like saying, it's like between saying killing oneself and being euthanized. So it depends on the words you use. And as Glynas said, it wouldn't be a good idea to use the word omnicide. That would be a turn off for many. So I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, because it sounds like homicide, right? So we're not really for homicide, we're for not reproducing, not bringing anyone else into this.
So when conversations about nukes come up, how is that not about killing?
Well, you don't have to have anything on the planet for nukes to be. What if you clear the planet of, people have ceased to reproduce themselves into extinction. You've managed to do something about all the animal life, but you're afraid of life coming back on the planet, so you got to do something about the planet. Perhaps nukes would be the way to take care of that. It's geocide in that you're killing the planet, so to speak, but that's not the same thing.
Yeah, I just think nuclear weapons, they just have this connection to extinction, this visual connection to the idea of extinction, because so many people think that's how we're going to go out.
And they may be right.
Okay, so this nuclear method is just fantasy. No one's advocating for that, because I thought I heard Gary talk about nukes before.
But I think he brought it up to say, like, after we're done, right, to make sure that nothing comes back, or if there may be some insect life or something like this that continues, and just as a fail-safe. I don't think I've heard Gary talking about using nukes on the planet while there are still humans here.
What about animals?
Not sure. If I remember correctly, I think animals, when Gary was talking about it, would still be on the planet. And again, that's messy. Of course, ideal world, you'd find a way to reduce the animal population to zero. But again, is that achievable? To me, I'm very pessimistic on the idea that we would be able to reduce the animal life to zero. But for sure, no humans on the planet when you set off those nukes.
So when he says, like, you have to break some eggs to make an omelet, what does that mean?
The animals that you wouldn't be able to account for by any other method.
Okay,
so in his mind, he doesn't believe that there's any other method that you could use to, say, cause the extinction of deep sea fish or something. I don't know. I mean, that's just an example. That there's some amount of animal life that you're not going to be able to extinct through other means. So that's what would be left on the planet if you were to use some sort of nuclear method.
Okay. What do you think about ex-EFILists? Why do some people really like EFILism and then do a 180?
I don't know.
The same with any movement, right? You have, communists who are ex-communists and hardcore libertarians who are ex-hardcore libertarians, and ex-MGTOWs who were once like fanatical MGTOWs or something. People change their minds about things. As for my opinion on ex-EFILists, I don't know if I know any ex-EFILists. Maybe logic rolls the dice, but then we're going back many, many years. If he's watching, by the way, hey, yeah, Wayward Horizon. I mean, Wayward was all over the place with everything. I guess Superhuman Dance was an EFIList before, and now I don't know if he still is. So yeah, I don't have that many. I don't have that many cases where I've dealt with ex-EFILists. I'd be interested to find out what their reasons are. And again, like anything, if someone has an opinion and they feel like they're right about something and they put the opinion forward, then I'm always happy to listen to it. Like Leith mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people dislike Inevitability. If we consider what normal average sensibilities are about what is acceptable in discourse between humans, I can see why people might be turned off by Inevitability. He once accused me of being too willing to have dicks shoved up my ass, and probably he's right on that. But I can imagine that if you are a sensitive person and you don't have the thickest of skins, it's very easy to be offended by Inventum. And
I think any normal person would find it offensive. I don't know why it has to be sensitive.
Yeah, okay, fine. I take that back then. Any normal person with normal sensibilities would be offended by discourse within Mendham. That's fine. And I think mainly then it's psychological, that if you're offended by the person, then you may gravitate towards points of view that try to undermine his points of view. So we mentioned Jim Crawford earlier. I don't know if they had some type of falling out, but maybe that beef within Mendham causes people not to be, or not to want to identify as as EFILists. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is mainly this sort of personality, issues, and people having problems with Gary and all that. But also, I mean, let's not pretend that vocalizing these ideas are met with, sunshine and rainbows. I mean, people hate hearing these things. So vocalizing this philosophy is very difficult. I mean, see, look what happened to, all you had to say was that you were going to talk to EFILists and you got in all kinds of shit. I mean, people are aggressive and nasty. And I mean, I've received death threats and harassment and all kinds of fun, just for voicing an EFIList message. I mean, look at anti-natalism. I mean, most anti-natalists who, I would say a good 80% of anti-natalists who produce a YouTube video on the subject take it down, because there's just a incredible amount of fear about what is going to happen to you if you are somebody of such a difficult, different opinion than the rest of, most of humanity. So I just don't think this is a very easy, I think it's a very burdensome opinion to have about the world. And I just don't think many people have much stamina for that.
Any other comments? Okay. I want to go to, let's see. We talked about cats. Was there any other comments about cats? No. I'll bring something up. Life sucks, you said, and it's been criticized. So I don't know if you remember this, but and I don't know what video you said this in. It says, when it begins, if baby rabbit is in pain, I could put him in a box and try to nurse him back to health so he can later be killed by some other predator, or I could simply end his suffering immediately. And for anyone who wants to know the fastest way to end the life of a small animal is just bash their skull in with a shovel or a hammer, whatever you have, just do it fast and hard. Do you remember saying that?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the context? And yeah,
it was because rabbits, I find dying rabbits all the time where I live, because I live on a big property, and lots of mice and rabbits and opossums and all sorts of animals I see sometimes dying. And if I can dispatch them quickly, I mean, if they feel anything, it's all instantaneous for them, and it's just trying to be merciful.
Can I make a quick extra comment on that?
Sure.
I think people also need to understand how expensive it is to euthanize an animal the right way. To euthanize a cat can cost like $70 to $100 in some parts of the country. Like, it's prohibitively expensive to do it the right way. So maybe we should be working on better access to those kinds of situations, because I think the way that we've set up access to those things unfortunately makes some of these like less pretty methods the only way people have any ability to free an animal from its imminent pain or pain that it's currently experiencing. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other comments? So when it comes in your conversation with the college students, you mentioned, and I don't know if any of you have mentioned this before, that people who procreate, it's akin to murder. Is that right?
Well, of course, G. Woon was famous for calling his book that.
Yeah. So what I'd be concerned about is, if it's akin to murder and someone is determined to do that action, is it ethical to stop that person? Laith, what do you? So like
I would literally do whatever I can to stop that person from procreating.
well, let me be very specific about it. Like, would you euthanize a pregnant woman? Would that be ethical to stop her from procreating?
If there's no other way to let her abort that child, then yeah, why not? Because by euthanizing that woman, you're saving that child from coming into existence, from suffering, from that. Even if the chance is only 1% of that child of becoming an antinatalist or becoming somebody who hates life, somebody who's suicidal. So why gamble on others? Why play the card of somebody else? So that's why, of course, I would because to me there's no difference between somebody who's planning to have a child and a terrorist. There's no difference between an ISIS fighter and a parent, especially nowadays, especially after the pandemic, especially after, like, we're only talking about the circumstances now, but the problem is existential. It's not circumstantial. But even with all these circumstances, people still do not give a shit. They still procreate without even thinking about it twice. And the problem is that it's legalized in all the world. All the governments give them the green light to do so. So it's the biggest crime ever that one could ever done, and it's legalized. So yeah, I would do what I can do in order to stop these people from procreating.
I'll just say, I mean, yes, they should be stopped, but legally you can't. You know, just like I just went through this experience with my mother. I wanted to kill her. I didn't want to have to hit her with a shovel, but I mean, I wanted to put a pillow over her face or do something other than watch her die for 7 days without water. It was insane, you know, but I would go to prison if I did that or if I got caught doing it. So that's kind of a problem. And that's what we're trying to reach people philosophically to not do it. I mean, you can't just go around killing parents. It's like you can't go around killing carnists for eating meat.
Glenos, do you have something to say about that?
No, but we're not killing in this situation. We're euthanizing. So the difference is that it's painless ending.
Glenos?
But I'll just say to that,
Sorry,
but then natalists would like make war on anti-natalists, right?
Yeah, so I'm personally not in favor of breaking laws. I think, yeah. So I've been through this situation, right, where I know people. I have friends who have children, and I didn't kill their wives, and I didn't kill my female friends who had children because I'm a terrible EFIList. And yeah, so yeah, personally, I wouldn't do it. Now, we live in a system where, unfortunately, it is accepted, right? That it is normal. It is, you know, it's even like a miracle to get pregnant and to have a kid. So in today's world, absolutely not. I'm not in favor of killing pregnant women. Again, I think the discussion, education, arguments need to be made. It is an interesting question under an anti-natalist-led society. So let's say that democracy, there were enough anti-natalists to become democratically relevant, and they elected an anti-natalist government. What would we do then about people who fell pregnant, and would they be punished by law? I don't think death penalty is suitable here and warranted, but I do agree in a consequentialist sense, at least intention sense, no, but in a consequentialist sense, yeah, having a kid makes you a murderer, it makes you an intentional abuser, torturer, and killer of people. And I think that has to be and should be stopped, but not through vigilantism.
Yeah, sorry. Before Amanda comments on this, I'm gonna rephrase the question if this is possible, Mark. I'm gonna ask this question to Glenos again, but in like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but between you and yourself, you would wish that person death if she's pregnant, for example, before having that child, right? You wouldn't kill it. You wouldn't kill her yourself, but you would wish that she dies before having that child, if there's no other way from stopping her, if there's no other way from aborting that child.
I mean, it's tricky because as a human, you immediately think of the people you know, and you think like, well, okay, my brother's wife, like, would I wish death on her? And you know, in terms of her intention, she isn't an evil person. She doesn't want to create harm. She's just unaware of the thing. And I think it's wrong to punish people with death for doing something unethical that they're unaware of. Would I wish death on her? And again, I might be inconsistent here, but my answer would be no, that I wouldn't wish death on her to save that person.
Even if death is inevitable and she's gonna die both ways in the future.
And you may be right here, and I am probably the person in contradiction with my own psychology and my own sociology versus my philosophy. I don't think I would wish death on her. I would wish education certainly on her child, and I would wish that her child would come to an antinatalist perspective, and more harm will be done by them coming into existence. But I'm not sure I can bring myself to say that I would advocate for the death of a pregnant woman who decides that they want to keep the child, even though I think they're doing something apparently wrong.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So let me start out by saying that I do think that procreation is murder. I actually kind of think it's hilarious that there's that much pushback to that concept, because in my mind, yeah, of course it is. I am not in any way for the euthanasia or murder of pregnant women. I think that's going a step far too far. You know, and I think that if that's in any way in a man's conception of a reasonable response, come on, guys, you gotta stick your dick in something else. I mean, if that's at all a you know, a roll of the dice you're willing to play, and if that's at all on the table, you know, for a possible outcome. First of all, you know, if that's the world we're going to live in, I mean, there has to be better contracts between men and women before sex. You know, if you were to say living in a world where there are those kinds of contracts, and you know, you both agreed that should a pregnancy occur, and it does happen, you know, that you would both agree to like get an abortion, and she went back on that. I do understand being unbelievably, perhaps murderously angry. I don't think that gives you a license to act on that murderous rage. You're just as responsible. You're just as culpable for the chance being taken. So I mean, if she has to die, so do you, quite frankly, and I'm not for that either, but I'm just saying I don't really understand why she would be the only one, you know, punished in that circumstance. Doesn't make any sense to me at all. Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, just don't have sex if that's going to be a punishment that you feel at all at liberty to dish out.
Yeah, just to make this clear, she shouldn't be punished. The only one, also her husband, the one who's also responsible for this crime. The thing is that maybe the funny thing is that we're EFILists here in this conversation.
I am not EFIList.
Who said so?
Me. I'm not an EFIList.
Yeah.
Don't drag me into this. Go ahead.
The four of us are EFILists, and we have no problem with extinction, and we have no problem with the red button. But it's so weird that we have a problem with euthanizing a pregnant person. What if that person is an animal, not a human? Would you still have the same answers, the same responses, the three of you?
I'm far more comfortable with the death of, or causing the death of, animals than I am with killing humans. Now, I know, name the trait. I am a vegan, by the way, and I am an advocate for animal rights, for them not to be tortured. But the killing of animals, I am generally, particularly with wild animals, I'm for their euthanasia. I can't bring myself to say that I'm for the killing of pregnant people who want to go ahead with their pregnancy, particularly in today's world. I mean, first of all,
because it's illegal?
I mean, a main reason would be, one reason is that it's illegal, but even from an ethical point of view, maybe it's simply moral intuition.
Can I just say
Yeah,
something?
I'm
Okay?
uncomfortable.
There's also
with it.
there's other ways of taking care of this issue. Again, if we're perhaps going to live in a world where there would be some sort of contract between a man and a woman, between sex, have a certain clear understanding ahead of time, and if she reneges on the agreement, take her to court. And I don't necessarily think of a court decision as she must have an. I mean, I don't love the idea of forcing a woman to have an abortion, but if she's signed a contract, and it's found that she's in violation of that contract, why not explore why not explore some of the other ways that this could be handled first, before vigilante euthanizing her?
Yeah, I would bite the bullet
kind of
on
ridiculous.
I would bite the bullet on forced abortion and think that is a more ethical solution. Now, it isn't a good thing to do, but it's certainly better than allowing the pregnancy to go on, and certainly better than punishing the woman with death. Forced abortion seems like it could be done in a relatively painless way, although it would be traumatic.
Yeah, the other part of it too is we're not, as much as I would not want that child to be born, and as much as a harm as I understand it to be, we're not living in some sort of extinctionist world plan, currently. And so I just feel like that would be such a, but I just speaking a little bit towards what you were saying a little bit about Glynos, is like, what if extinction was imminent? There's a understanding by most human beings that like we're on this course and we're not deviating from this course. Again, I don't think murder is the answer to that question, but something like contracts before sex, or
what do you mean? I think when you say contracts before sex, like a death contract would be okay?
No, I don't think a death contract would be okay, but I think that, what to do in the instance that the condom breaks, or who's going to take care of the child, who's going to do you want a child or not? I mean, people don't talk about these things before they fuck. They just
would forced abortion be okay?
If somebody has signed a contract saying that they will not procreate, that they don't want a child, and there's an agreement between both parties, and both parties have signed that contract, and the contract specifically specifies that they will get an abortion should an accident happen, and then there's a going back on that agreement, I think there's at least an argument to be made that the man would kind of have the right to at least try to enforce that contract by law. I don't love it, but if we're putting murdering her and forcing to have an abortion on the tables, I think that's probably the one I'm going to pick.
What do you think life sucks in life?
I think even without a contract, there should be forced abortion. Why there should be a contract? There shouldn't be a contract in the first place. There shouldn't be any more births. There should be forced sterilization.
But again, what are we taking this chance over? I mean, just to be able to ejaculate in the vagina, we're gonna chance having to murder people and force abortions. I mean, figure out some other way to get jollies off. You know what I mean? I just sort of feel like that's the real answer here. Stop taking the chance in the first place.
No.
Men are the ones creating that circumstance, so maybe it's up to them to not have to, make these other really awful decisions if accidents happen. I mean, look, I want men and women to be able to have their joyful intercourse. I mean, I've never been an antinatalist that's like, we must practice celibacy or something, because obviously we have all of these tools to prevent pregnancy, and let's use them to the best. Let's put Arthur Schopenhauer on condoms and let's have sex all day. But I'm just saying, if we're gonna put murdering people and forcing abortions, then maybe we ought to be changing the ways that we're accidentally producing children, because we're taking huge chances. Nobody should have to die over it. Nobody should have to die over an orgasm.
It's kind of hard to figure out how to move on from this topic, but
yeah. Infanticide. Come on, we haven't gone through that yet.
But I want to clarify, like, I definitely disagree with the forced abortion and forced euthanasia. But I think this highlights that some people have concerns about the moral precepts that can be extended to what Laith said. Like, isn't that concerning? Like, aren't you guys concerned about that? Like,
concerned about
so like
forced euthanasia?
No. Okay, so like I understand where you were coming from, because if you say that having being pregnant or bringing a child into existence is akin to terrorism, then when someone says, well, maybe the ethical thing to do would be to stop that person by any means, that it would justify violence. And I think that's some of the scary stuff that people are concerned about.
No, because when the problem is that when you have a child, you're feeding terrorists, you're feeding rapists, you're feeding homophobes, you're feeding all the bad people in this world. So that's why it's even worse than terrorism itself.
Yeah.
Because if there's no more victims, a terrorist cannot commit a crime. If there's no more homosexuals, for example, there's not going to be more homophobes. If there's no more children, there's not going to be more child molesters. So this is the problem.
Yeah, but sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
No, I don't think anybody is disagreeing. Well, maybe some of us are disagreeing with that. I don't disagree with all that, Laith. It's your prescription.
It's the prescription, yeah. So like the description of how bad it is, fine. But like, if you're talking about the prescription of that it would be ethical to end someone's life because they're determined to bring someone into existence, that's where it gets into, because one of the criticisms is that some EFILists would want to kill pregnant women, and the logic, it sounds like some people would, and that's concerning.
I'd like to throw a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Laith, have you ever met a pregnant woman?
Yes, many.
Did you kill them? And if not, why not? I'm just curious, just to go, because I've known you for a fair amount of time. We've spoken a little bit. I don't see it in you that you are a person that wants to kill someone, right? Whether you believe.
No, of course not. Of course not.
Knowing you and knowing that, you're a sound guy and so on. So what stopped you from killing them apart from the fact that it's illegal?
Apart from the fact that it's illegal, I'm not with killing them, shooting them, but I'm with euthanizing them. And since euthanasia is not legal as well, so I cannot do that. But if I have the power to do so,
how are you
if there's no other way to stop her.
How are you defining euthanizing here? Do you mean like tying her down and giving her a lethal injection?
Like taking her to a clinic that helps in assisted suicide.
And she says, no, please don't kill me. I want to continue to live and give birth to my child. Because that's not, euthanasia has to be.
It's not quite what euthanasia is.
It sounds like murder.
Euthanasia has to be voluntary.
Yeah.
But to me, there's no difference between killing an animal, a pregnant animal, and killing a pregnant human. It's totally the same. So I still do not understand why some people have no problem with killing a pregnant animal, but have a problem with killing a pregnant human, because this is a kind of speciesism to me.
So what if the woman is telling you to stop? No, I don't want to die. I want to have my child. That's still euthanasia to you? They're vocalizing in a language you can understand that that's not what they want?
No, but if
the one who caused them to be in that situation in the first place?
If you show her that you either die or you either abort your child, then if she keeps on refusing to abort
the circumstance, You
No,
caused the circumstance.
I don't think in this thought experiment that Leith caused the circumstance. I don't think he's the one that impregnated her. I think he
Of
just...
course I'm not. And
Mhm.
if I cause this circumstance, I deserve to be killed as well.
Mhm.
I deserve to be killed. But I did not cause this circumstance. And this is why I got my vasectomy, in order to not fall in mistakes as well. In order not to, because I do not understand why they would refuse to have an abortion then.
Because they're a mother at that point, and it's not a particularly, they're going to have an emotional attachment. I mean, whether that's rational or not is a whole different conversation. But, you know, women do tend to fall in love with the being growing inside of them. It's just a fact. A lot of women feel that way.
But does this justify what's going to happen to that child in future?
You know what?
It
No,
doesn't.
it doesn't. But it also doesn't justify you killing her over it. Sorry. I mean, I don't think we're going to agree on that.
Do you think we've exhausted this topic?
You can want to all you want, but I mean, you know, again, have an understanding beforehand. Take her to court. Something. I don't know. It's just, yeah, whatever.
Do you think we've exhausted this topic, or do any of you have any
Probably.
more? Do you have any more thoughts on this? Anybody? Okay. Life Sucks. Did you have anything you kind of? Okay. What are your views on euthanasia and the right to die?
If she's pregnant, it's fine.
Oh my
No.
God.
No, I think euthanasia and right to die seems like a no-brainer. If people decide that they no longer have interests in continuing to exist, then we should have access, and safe and reliable access, to euthanasia. I understand there are arguments like, oh, what if the person changes their mind or something? But I think if a person is checked out and they decide they no longer want to continue existing, I'm yet to see any moral argument to say that we shouldn't give that autonomy to that person.
Can I jump in really quick and say one more thing about killing pregnant women?
Yeah.
Sorry. I just want to make a quick point that this is not an EFIList only conundrum or issue. There have been two, not one, but two death metal bands now that have written songs called, or albums called, with an antinatalist theme. One of which made a video where this person who's supposedly an antinatalist goes and hunts down a pregnant woman and kills her. So I think it is unfortunately a way that this word antinatalism is being interpreted often by people that don't necessarily have any familiarity with the philosophy. And I have seen this exact same.
Leith is familiar with it.
I'm just saying for the sake of the audience that this isn't just something that comes up in EFILism. It's pretty much antinatalism wide.
Okay, gotcha.
That I see this in regular antinatal spaces fairly often as well. I just wanted to make that point. Sorry. Yeah.
I want to add one more thing, because Glynis asked me the question, like, why haven't I killed pregnant women that I met before? I think it's the same exact reason why you wouldn't kill a terrorist or an ISIS fighter if you see him in the street. You would call the police, for example, and let them know about him, but you wouldn't kill him yourself. Yeah, because it's killing in the end, as you said.
Now we can move on to euthanasia.
Okay, so
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Euthanasia and the right to die. Yeah, I think Glynos gave an answer. I lost track.
I am for the right to die.
Life sucks.
Give it to everybody. Give everybody the option.
Okay, well, let me expand about it more, because I think in one of your videos you said you give like people candy or whatever, like suicide stuff. I don't have the quote.
Who, me?
Yeah, you were like, if I could give out suicide pills, I would.
No, I said I would pass it out like candy, meaning that if I had the power to legalize a graceful exits, if I had the power to legalize medically assisted suicide, I would do that. Yeah. I said it in a perhaps not, I said it in perhaps a less than, I I don't know, philosophically rigid way. I said it in a bit of a fun way,
Yeah.
but it's been interpreted as some sort of I don't know, some sort of like I'm wishing everybody to just, you know, kill them. I'm a pro-mortalist and I just want everybody to kill themselves as soon as
Yeah,
possible.
I think some people interpreted it that way.
Whatever. Yeah, well, that's what happens.
Is
Stay
there
away from your place at Halloween.
Right.
is there like an age limit? Is there any is there any boundaries? Is there any ethical safeguards? Is there any stipulations in place for your different views on the right to die?
I believe that the right to die movement should keep going on until euthanasia is legalized in every single country in this world without any terms and conditions for every single person, no matter what how old they are, and it's a human right at the end, because yeah, somebody said before that we didn't have the opportunity to say no before giving birth to us. So at least give us that chance to say yes to graceful exit.
It's kind of tough though, right? If you have, like, let's say there's a 4-year-old girl and that she wanted something for Christmas and she wasn't given it, and she said, like, I want to die. Like, to what extent would you consider that to be serious and really in her interests? I can see arguments for having an age limit to safeguard such circumstances and to stop people from abusing it. But then I can see the other side where, you know, if you have a 12-year-old who's terminally ill or something, or even just checked out and really has no desire to continue living, why should they have to wait 6 more years and suffer for 6 more years before they're given that right? So I definitely see both sides of that point, and I have no question. I have no answer as to what would be a reasonable, or whether there should be an age limit on there.
Any other thoughts?
I kind of put less of an emphasis on age than like taking things by case basis. I think that there are instances of very young children who can completely articulate this, and I think that I'm not against safeguards and, okay, you know, you have to go through this battery of tests and therapy and checks and balances. Is it something that you need, that you're lacking? Can we give it to you? I mean, I forget the term that you always use, Mark, something of care, you know, like what kind of care are we, not burden of care, but I think you know what I'm saying. Like, if there's something that can make it better and it can, you know, that's great. But I think that unfortunately the conversation too much is sort of essentially saying that those kinds of safeguards never end, and you sort of just never let the person make the choice that they're, you know, that they were being able to articulate in the first place. So there has to be some amount of safeguards, and also some amount of relenting those safeguards at a reasonable point in time. I don't necessarily think that I would put an age limit on it again. Perhaps you would have more safeguards where certain ages are considered, but I think for the most part, I would make it available to anybody.
Thanks. Any other thoughts? Okay, to Amanda, what did you mean by you want to EFILize from within?
I don't think very much of anthropocentric antinatalism, and EFILism is sentiocentric antinatalism. And I would like to be a voice in the midst of antinatalism that gives an argument for sentiocentrism, essentially. I am an antinatalist, and I'm amongst antinatalists, and I'd like my sentiocentric perspective to be at least heard. And I also think that as a philosophy that, whether its proponents like it or not, or whether it's their individual goals or not, this philosophy causes extinction. And I think if you're going to voice a philosophy that causes extinction, you have some responsibility to all the creatures that will be affected by human extinction. And I think that that means that, again, you have some responsibility to take into account what happens to the animals at that point. I think I want people to see that the crossroads that I was talking about before, the EFIList and vehement crossroads, and have meaningful discussions about which path is the most ethical. And that's really all I meant by it. I know that it's been interpreted to mean like somehow I want to, kill cats in front of people or something. I don't know, but yeah.
I think there was a possible interpretation that it sounds like a Trojan horse within the anti-nihilist community to promote EFILism, or to, I don't know, to, to try and change it over to an EFIList view instead of an anti-nihilist view. But I guess that technically is true. You do want to promote EFILism. I
want to make these arguments. I think they're important arguments for anti-natalists to be challenged by, but I'm also somebody that's done my absolute best to give voice with my own limited powers to as many anti-natalist perspectives as possible. I've done more than most anti-natalists have done, trying to explore the full gamut and breadth and width of what anti-natalism is and how it's existing in the world. And I've tried to give equal, ANI has tried its best to give equal footing to all forms of procreation, because I think it's important for all forms of anti-procreative peoples to talk to one another. I don't think that means I'm obligated to, also not have my own individual perspectives and voice those perspectives. Yes, I would like people to understand the sentiocentric EFIList perspective better. I think that's more than fair. I think it should be a round table, basically.
Mm-hmm. Glenn, so it looks like you wanted to say something.
Oh no, I'm in total agreement with Amanda, and I think it makes sense to EFILize from within, in the same way that I remember like 6 or 7 years ago, we were speaking about, which communities we thought would be most receptive to what we called then just anti-natalism. And we thought, okay, well, the vegans kind of get it. The vegans understand that we shouldn't reduce harm. So maybe we'll take that philosophy to the vegans. I think it makes perfect sense to take a philosophy to an audience that seems most readily willing to listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If any of you want to drop out now, it's completely fine. I'll continue going as long as people want to stick around, but this is I feel like we've covered a lot of topics. So if anybody wants to duck out now, it's completely fine. But
well, how many more questions do you have?
Like 4 or 5.
I think I could probably stick around for that.
Okay. All right.
I'm fine. I'll just be back in literally 30 seconds.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
In the meantime, can I just make a correction from earlier? Because apologies to Amendum. I think I misspoke earlier when I was describing the CRAP acronym. I know cannibalism used to be part of it, but I think that was the other C. So I believe C stands for consumption and not cannibalism. Yeah. I think I said cannibalism. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of blanked on it too for some reason when it was consumption, reproduction, cannibalism, addiction, and now it's consumption, reproduction, parasitism.
Right, because parasitism kind of takes care of the cannibalism.
Yeah.
It's kind of redundant, yeah.
Was there any points of clarification that you wanted to make, Amanda?
No. Okay. Can't think of any right now. Are there any that you think I should?
Well, I thought you were going to make notes for anything that you wanted to bring up last time we spoke.
I think a lot of the notes that I made would take us a little too far afield.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it's fine. Thank you, though. I appreciate that.
No problem. What do you think the critics get right or wrong about EFILism?
That's a tough one.
If you can elaborate the question. I'm sorry, Amanda.
for the critics that you've seen, either through the comment section or the videos criticizing EFILism, what views do you think they get right, and which ones do you think they get wrong, and why not?
Oh yeah.
Actually, let me ask that when Glynos is. Hey, Glynos. Hello, can you hear us?
Yep.
So my next question was, with the criticisms that you've seen over the years, with the comment section or response videos or videos critiquing EFILism, what views do you think they get right, and what views do you think they get wrong, and why not?
So I was surprised when when I've been kind of out of the game a little bit for a while. I was surprised when I realized that there was so much resistance to EFILism. In terms of the comments that I get on my videos, they are either incredibly supportive from anti-natalists or incredibly dismissive from people who hate anti-natalism. I don't think I've come across people who are anti-natalists but who reject my EFIList positions. I would agree that the optics look bad. So again, talking about things like omnicide or red button things, those things look bad. And again, I'll just go back to the previous thing. I think maybe it's simply a personality clash of in Mendham, that people don't like him. One thing that I alluded to before we started recording was that we're often forced on the defensive, maybe even in anti-natalist communities, where we are thought to be bad people, that we are evil people with nefarious goals, and that we are out to, I don't know, bloodthirsty people who want to harm people. So I reject that, because I only try to be consistent. I try to be fair with myself. I try to analyze my own thought processes and to understand, like, okay, who am I as a person? And I recognize that I have all kinds of character flaws and limitations and things like this. But I try to be honest with myself about the things that I believe. And I can tell you for sure that I have no desire to harm things. EFILism is a philosophy that shines a light on harm and says harm is bad. These levels of harm are unacceptable. The issue is pressing. We can't just turn our noses up and say, oh, that's life, or maybe we'll get rid of humans, or humans will go extinct and we'll just let the animals continue. EFILism is the only philosophy that I see that addresses the situation, and actually realizes that we have at least an obligation to consider what steps that we can take as drivers of the bus to bring about a peaceful exit. So I think it would be unfair for any critics of EFILists to paint us to be evil people who are out to do harm, when that's the total opposite of what we are.
Yeah, well said. There is this conception that we're basically monsters or something like that, and there's nothing in me that wants to hurt anyone at all. There is, also a long-standing conception that we're some sort of cult. I mean, we almost never talk to one another. We're certainly not led by anybody. So I think that's just a complete, lie, essentially. Yeah, I mean, I this really isn't about, murder fantasies. I think, one of the biggest things is that I was trying to say earlier is that there's not a whole lot of room given for EFILists to make these kinds of prescriptions, but also say, hey, we don't really know how any of this could be accomplished. And there's really not a whole lot of room to say you don't know when you're an EFIList. And this idea that we're trying to seek from a larger constituency of the human race, how these kinds of things could come about, is sort of not allowed, but it's also not, it's just sort of taken in a sort of bizarre way in my estimation. People don't allow that. So I'm lost my train of thought a little bit. I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead. Anybody else?
Yeah, some people criticize EFILism by saying how do you know animals are suffering? Suffering is subjective, and so on. You know, the same arguments that they use against antinatalism and veganism in general. So like you have to go with them again and again to deal with these arguments and to respond to these arguments. And I see these arguments do not make any sense, but I kind of understand people who criticize EFILism when it comes to, as Glynos was saying, when it comes to talking about the red button and about ending life for everyone. Like, I still understand people who say, like, who gives you the right to do so? What if some people want to continue on living? Who gives you the right to contribute to their extinction if they do not want to, for example? Even if they agree with you that they suffer and so on, but they want to live. And yeah, I understand people who have that fear of death itself. Yeah, I have nothing else to add.
I mean, obviously, I'm still an EFIList, so I haven't heard any actual counter argument to it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, too often it's a lot of this personality stuff. It's a lot of trolling. It's a lot of, there's very little philosophical pushback. And the only thing I want to say is that the other thing that I kind of forgot to mention is that, you know, I think one of the biggest disagreements is again, this line of where anti-natalism ends and EFILism begins, or what these different distinctions are, if it's the same thing, what that means about the person identifying themselves as an anti-natalist. But I think anti-natalism creates the circumstance for which all of these EFIListic questions start to become a lot more important. And the reaction to that I see instead is basically anti-natalist cutting away at their own philosophy. You know, if there's an implication that we have to do something about the rest of sentient life, oh, well, let's just forget the animals have anything to do with it. Or if, you know, extinction is too scary, then, oh, well, that's, you know, that's just a consequence, and you know, it's not the goal. And so I think that in the face of EFILism, anti-natalists have become a lot more avoidant of even what's on paper, you know. So it's that's troubling to me.
So a lot of these criticisms are about the personality of the founder, pretty much motivated by. Is that an accurate description?
To some extent, sure, yeah.
So, in terms of propagating the idea, is that like a roadblock or an obstacle?
Well, one of the reasons I made the EFIList is because, you know, people didn't like these words coming out of Gary's mouth. So I used the same words and had them coming out of characters' mouths, you know, and so there's, you know, I don't know, you know, I think there's always a way of saying the same things with another person saying them. And there is a certain like, how do you give people enough of what they sort of need visually or in terms of intonation or personality, and still be able to tell them about these very difficult ideas. I think that's how you deliver the message is of utmost importance, but also something that I certainly don't have a good answer to. But, you know, I will say I certainly have no reason to complain about Gary. He's been nothing but very kind and supportive to me personally. And I've, you know, maintained a very good friendship with him for many years now. And he's certainly inspired all of us and many more people besides this. So people can say whatever they want. You know, certainly I don't think any of us agree with everything he's ever said. But at the same time, I mean, you know, all this emphasis has been put on how much he, you know, supposedly turns people off. But, you know, a whole lot of, I mean, I've seen, there's so many channels I can point to over the years that become completely dedicated as, you know, responding to things he's said. So I think he's been this incredible catalyst of getting people to think about some admittedly very unpleasant things, but I think he's inspired a lot of people. I don't think that should be ignored. Yeah.
All right. What are some points of disagreement that you have with Emendum? Anybody?
There's things that I don't know. I don't really know. And like, for instance, I think he is of the opinion that there's a great deal that you couldn't accomplish in an extinction scenario through sterilization. And I'm not 100% sure of that. I don't know. You know, I think there's some of these unknowns that I would more point to for me. Stuff that I need to, you know, do more investigating on my own about.
Is he the one who said once that that procreation is justifiable in a specific case when you are the last generation on Earth or something like that?
I think he may have said that. I think he may have said it. Benatar also said this too, though.
I think it's a dilemma that's been talked about, but I don't think he's recommended it. I mean, it is a dilemma. I mean, honestly, with any, I feel like with any, I mean, if we're going to become, you know, transhumanists, that requires us to keep pumping out generations, or if we're going to, you know, cause sentient extinction, that unfortunately might entail that you have to pump out a generation or two to serve a purpose. I'm not for that. You know, maybe there's some sort of technological answer to that. I have absolutely no idea. But I think that is an unfortunate dilemma that there's not a great answer to at this particular point in time. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add that I know I mentioned earlier that Gary can turn people off, but he's been a huge influence, possibly the biggest influence on my thinking in my whole existence. I'm certainly glad of his existence. And yeah,
Same.
he has inspired us to do this. I mean, I haven't made a lot of videos for quite some time, but certainly he was the reason I got into this. He was the reason, you know, I questioned a lot of this type of stuff, but also the hugely therapeutic value of it, because I think, you know, most of us live in what I would call like the real world, right? Where you have to kind of say please and thank you, and you have to be nice to people, and you have to play these rhetoric games and make small talk. And the one thing that I admire about about Emendum that I know can turn people off is that he cuts right through all of that stuff. That there is there's none of the frills. There's none of the dressing it up and rhetorically trying to manipulate someone. I feel like he, whether you agree with him or not, and I certainly agree with him in every meaningful way, I found it incredibly therapeutic having to deal with people and then watching a 45-minute video of Emendum expressing all of the frustrations that I have with dealing with people. Feeling bad for him because I can see that he's extremely passionate, he's extremely stressed, he lacks patience of dealing with poor arguments, and that probably we should take into consideration the amount of work that he's done and the amount of effort that he's done to put arguments across, like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of content, only for then to have someone come back and say something like, oh, well, how do you know that pain is bad, or something like this. I can imagine that the frustration must be huge there. And so it's easy to imagine him snapping at someone for thinking like, I fucking put all of my life into this and you won't even do me the smallest amount of respect of actually checking what I believe. Instead, you're coming to me with this God stuff. Like,
Was that reasonable if he has like 3,000 videos? There's probably even more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to understand, trying to get into Gary's mentality or Emendum's mentality, where he must be frustrated with having to deal with people who don't know his work and do accuse him of being or saying something that he hasn't said or hasn't done. I mean, I'm old enough and I've been around YouTube for long enough to remember all of the like Kentucker guy and the horrible things that he did to him, and arguments with Pyro and things like this. And I certainly felt the frustration just listening to Gary talking to these people. I felt the frustration that he has. And so while I'm not here to, you know, I'm generally in my everyday life, I'm kind of polite and I live in this real world and I try not to cause upset if I can help it. Gary certainly does that, and I find that admirable, and I would certainly like to have the balls and the courage to actually put your heart on your sleeve and to go out there and to preach what you genuinely believe. Because I
But
feel
Glenos, like if I have a philosophical conversation with you and I'm not used to the I'm not used to the terminology, and Gary doesn't use these philosophical terms either. And I'm trying to understand that from a philosophical point of view. And then even if I watch, like, I don't know, maybe 10 videos of his, right? And I still have questions. And if the method of trying to inquire into your belief system, I get back insults, how is that a good faith conversation? How am I supposed to engage with that?
Yeah, and maybe there are limitations over what Gary is most effective at and what he's not very effective at. For sure, if you have an inquiring person who's coming in there and asking questions, maybe he doesn't deal with those as well as he should do. In terms of the content that he puts up and the hours of explaining his views, I think he does a very good job of explaining everything that he believes. I mean, I certainly can't think of a question that I would go to Emendum with that I don't know the answer to, just having watched all of his content. But perhaps you are right that as a new person coming to him and asking the questions, maybe someone more diplomatic could be there to give more concise answers and to be more patient. But yeah, I don't, I'm not, that's not a criticism. That's not a criticism of Inevitability. It's just maybe what's more effective. And like with any activist or any philosophical point of view, I think you do need different people to go in different directions. You do sometimes need the shouty person who says like, fuck this is all fucking bullshit, without the philosophical terms. And you have
That's
Benatar,
fine, but when I say fuck you, that's different. When I'm trying to, like, there's a difference between saying my beliefs are stupid and dumb and then call me a fat fuck and to get the fuck out. Like, that's different, right?
Yeah,
now you're attacking people. And
yeah,
then
I'm not.
When critics use some insults, then it's like people aren't talking towards each other anymore.
Yeah, I personally don't rely on insults if I'm having a discourse with somebody, and I'm not. If he did say this to you, then I'm
He
not
hasn't,
here to
by the
defend
way.
him.
I'm just.
Oh.
But yeah,
I talked to him last
that
weekend and he didn't insult me, but I've seen him insult others. And so, like, when I see that, and I'm like, these people have questions, they have criticisms. And what I've noticed is that people are like, well, you're lying. And it's like, it could be a lie or it could be a mistake, right? So why jump to maliciousness when it could be misunderstanding?
I don't think it's maliciousness, but at the same time, I mean,
no, I meant like the critics when Gary's like, you're lying, you're a liar, and like the critics could just
the thing. I think that a rational person wouldn't judge a person but by his attitude rather than his views. Like if you want to take a position, an ethical position, you look for the philosophy itself. You do not judge that person who's preaching for that philosophy. Like I wouldn't judge veganism or animal rights activism only because Gary Yourofsky, for example, is very aggressive in his way of preaching veganism or animal rights.
And he advocates violence too. I forgot to mention that some people thought I was misleading when I brought up the vegan, like when I said I've seen this in other movements. Gary Yourofsky has talked about violence. And so this idea that I was misleading people with that is just absurd. But I think when I ask everybody questions about their philosophy, that is what I'm trying to do.
But I think you also have to take into account, I mean, you're not in an academic environment. And I think it is more meaningful to take people. Listen, it's who he is, and you're on the internet, and you have to kind of take people for who and what they are, and it's just not going to be the same thing as like going to school where everybody has to sort of be a kind of buttoned up kind of personality. I think there is some reality to the fact that some of his content is hard to, if you wanting to know one specific thing, there's 10,000 videos out there of Gary, including the live room stuff. So it is hard to find stuff, but more often than not, people are not willing to do research into this. And the other part of it is people are, like with pro-mortalism, people do kind of build identities around this subject before they've looked into it very far, which is
Oh yeah, that
a
was my other
shame.
question. What do you recommend for new people getting involved with like wanting to call themselves EFIList? And
Think about it. Think about it and talk to people, and stop assigning your whole personality to difficult, controversial philosophical ideas before you've really taken time to explore things. I can't relate to it at all. I took an entire year to contemplate antinatalism before I started calling myself an antinatalist. EFILism didn't exist yet. So I don't understand that impulse at all,
so what would you recommend?
By the way,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, Mark, sorry to interrupt. I have to leave in 5 minutes. So do we still have too much time to finish?
What do you mean? We have lots of time. Kind of, not really.
I mean, are there many questions remaining?
I'm gonna go until people want to leave. But my next question was like, how are people going to engage with EFIList? So I have a social privilege where I have connections to people, so I can like say, hey, can we do a Zoom call and talk about your philosophy? But I don't think everybody has that that advantage, right? So if someone wants to engage with EFIList and try to understand the philosophy, engage with it, argue it, criticize it, whatever, what advice would you give for that?
I'm a huge fan of the old school YouTube response videos back and forth.
say
I
that
would
too.
love to see more of that. I would love to see, there have been a couple of videos that you were kind enough to send me, Mark, where people outlined their position and broke it down and explained. Now, I know that not everyone feels comfortable making YouTube videos, but the comment section is there that people can do it. We also have a group on Facebook, and people can post comments there, and they do post comments there. I don't think we're closed off as a group, but I think the comment section on everyone's videos here are open. The Facebook groups are open. People don't get kicked out and shouted at and called names for disagreeing. So yeah, the typical avenues.
No, I mean, my email is always open. My my groups I run are public. I mean, yeah, I guess with Facebook, having a closed group is just sort of the way they're done for the most part. But I think we're pretty accessible. I mean, I don't. There's quite a lot of us, on top of that at this point. So yeah, I don't see how it's more difficult to talk to us than anybody else.
Yeah, I would say watch the EFIList and read EFILism.com.
What do you think about the EFILism wiki? I think Lord St. Next did that.
Yeah, it's good. It's not in Mendham's, it's an interpretation of like in Mendham's philosophy, I would say. So it's not his exact words, but it's good. It's a good place to read about it for sure.
Yeah, I have some issues with the fact that some of the language is so different. Like, I don't know if he took it out, but I mean, he had a line in there describing EFILism as patched nihilism that kind of made my head explode a little bit. But I think it's an incredible effort. I mean, don't get me wrong on that at all. He put an incredible amount of passion and dedication into writing it. So as a artistic response, or as some form of an archive on it, it's very interesting. I think there is some danger of relating I think some onus should be placed on using the language that a philosopher uses, and not reinterpreting. But I'm just as guilty. And I mean, I did add things in the EFIList, so it's hard not to do that as well.
So would EFILism.com be a good place to cite?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
It's a good place to start. Gary and I built it a couple years back. It hasn't been updated in a million years. It does have some little grammatical errors too. I will try to update it at some point. But yeah.
If I was to make a video criticizing EFILism, what is the likelihood I'd get a response in terms of like another response video by someone other than Gary?
That's a harder question to answer, because I love response videos, but it's not really my wheelhouse, so to speak. And a lot of, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, there aren't that many. I mean, the whole response video culture is also kind of dead. So people that haven't been around as long might not even really occur to them to respond in that kind of way.
By the way, I think there's also donotgod.com, right?
Technically, it's donotgo.com now. It's an older URL.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm so sorry, everyone. I really had fun.
No problem. I really appreciate you coming,
um,
Laith. It's you and in your time. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I got to
Yeah,
run to
thanks to the four of you.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Hey,
Laith.
good
Thank-
care, Laith.
Yeah.
I'll see you later.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
to all of
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Oh, you're leaving
Thanks,
too,
bye.
Matt.
gotta
Take
go.
good care, Matt. It's good
Okay,
seeing you.
thanks.
Yeah.
My
Bye.
condolences again.
Thank
Take
you.
good care of yourself.
Yeah,
Okay,
nice
see you
to see
guys.
you, Matt. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Okay. Would you be down for one more question?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. You have two buttons, the red one that kills all life, the green one that makes it all life is incapable of any suffering. What would be the moral ethical choice? Which button would you choose and why? What possible objections an EFIList could have to pressing the green button? If it is true that it is suffering that is the main issue and that the ending of suffering is the main cause, why would ending all life be preferable to improving all life?
With the green button, do people live forever or do they die out?
Let's say either or. So let's
Yeah.
say
So
that
the question of whether
no, I was just saying, like, let's
so the
go down
question-
both paths and see where it goes.
Okay, so with I think death, the question over whether death is a harm is also an interesting one. I personally probably lean towards believing that death is a harm. So with the green button, you could press the green button, people don't suffer, and they eventually die. It's really difficult to comprehend of a human without suffering who lives a meaningful life. I feel like it's such an ingrained part of us. It's such a necessary part of us that I really can't imagine it. Now, would I be in favor of that over the current circumstance? Obviously, yes. And I know that one of the guys, David Pierce, I think, spoke about possibilities of like recalibrating humans so that they had different levels of pleasure. So if they put their hand on a fire, for example, they would have some neurons firing, alerting them to this danger with small amounts of pleasure. I find that quite fantastical. I really can't conceive of that as being a thing. I think pain obviously has an important function for us as humans to avoid greater danger, and it does the job very, very well. In fact, too well. So yeah, would I pick the green button over the red button? I wouldn't see the point in. I'm not sure I would see the point in having this green button where humans exist, they don't suffer, but they continue to reproduce. I can't see what would drive them and what would motivate them and whether they would be capable of experiencing any pleasure at all. At least when we have suffering, we get to experience pleasure, which is the cessation or the negation of suffering. So I'm not sure what the green button would do. I don't know. Maybe we can discuss it, and maybe you have ideas over how this green button would work. But it's simply impossible for me to fathom.
Any thoughts, Amanda?
I sort of feel the same way. I mean, without the presence of suffering, you could argue even that people wouldn't be able to learn because you sort of like have to have the carrot and whip thing in order to, make sort of intellectual progress in a lot of instances, at least. I feel like if the green button caused a circumstance in which people achieve immortality, on top of it, you would also probably have to come with the added implication that you'd have to stop reproduction. I don't see how, even if, I mean, again, it's so hard to conceptualize because, like, would it really matter if we produced, 12 billion human beings on a planet with finite resources if they don't suffer? Like, you'd overpopulate, but nothing would sort of be bad because this, there wouldn't be any suffering involved in it. because this button has been pressed and that eliminates all. I mean, basically humans would be reduced down to a sort of automaton kind of existence. And I also agree, Linos, with what you said, that like in our current circumstance, if it's the if it's the green button and nothing else, I would maybe say that that was an acceptable thing to press. Again, human beings without the capacity to suffer, I think you would have to have the memory of having suffered for that to mean something. Otherwise, I don't really think that you would also be in a situation where you would understand joy and pleasure and all of that. I don't really think that would mean anything to, I kind of think that you'd end up producing humans that were sort of a blank. And I don't really see the point to that.
Are there any pluses and minuses of advocating anti-natalism as an EFIList?
I think it makes it more difficult to some extent. I think that, you know, you get people, you sort of have some chance of getting people to understand why humans maybe shouldn't be around. But when you add all of sentience to it, it's just a much more difficult argument for people to accept. But at the same time, you know, I know this might piss some people off, but I mean, I think that we are taking a more complete view of what antinatalism is. I don't think that we are doing what I see a lot of antinatalists do, which is cutting away, as I was saying before, at the philosophy to sort of not include some of these things that have difficult implications. And so I think it's a more complete antinatalism that we're advocating, because it's not doing all this subtraction. And I think it's harder to do the subtraction because it's not being as honest to the implications.
How come you called your road, what was it, the road to antinatalism? Right? That's your series, Glenos?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not like road to EFILism, because it ended on EFILism.
Yeah, I think when I did it a long time ago, and certainly the term antinatalism was a lot more common. So it may have been a choice simply for antinatalism was just the term that people were using. And I tried to structure it around what I thought were like stripping away, as I mentioned before, stripping away beliefs. So it started with like physicalism and materialism and broke down each thing point by point. And then EFILism is the last video, because it is the last, like Amanda said, that people might follow antinatalism to a point and then reach EFILism and think like, okay, this is a step too far. So I thought I would make a series that would try to be as comprehensive as possible and try to get the main arguments of antinatalism down in a broad sense and then make the case for EFILism towards the end. I'm not sure now if I would structure it the same way and if I would title it the same way. So if I was coming to YouTube and deciding to make this series now, I'm not sure if I would call it the same or if I would call it something different, just because I've seen over the last at least 5 years that antinatalism means something different to many, many different people. Whereas at the time, it felt like antinatalism meant the same thing to all people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you see that there are differences within EFILism as well?
I don't think that there's massive variety in thought between EFILists. I think we generally agree on the main things. There may be certain ethical dilemmas about, you know, is it okay, like with Leith, who, in my opinion, said something rather shocking, that it's justified to euthanize a pregnant woman against her will. Now, for me, it's against my sensibility. So that's an example of something that people disagree on. I mean, maybe I was thinking about this idea of like, what is pleasure? And if pleasure is simply a relief or a cessation of suffering, could you get that? Could you mine that as a brain state and just isolate that feeling of pleasure? And could you put that into people's brains? And would that be a better solution to the red button thing? Could you just have people who are constantly experiencing pleasure? Now, again, to me, that sounds weird and difficult to comprehend, but at least as a theoretical thought experiment, it could be something that, you know, may not require the red button, but then that still, for me, wouldn't justify bringing new people into existence. So if you wanted to hook people up to wonderful pleasure machines, that would be maybe beneficial, but I'm not sure how many people would actually sign up for that. I don't know, because I do think people would lose their identity. They would lose their sense of self, and they would be committing character suicide by doing that. So I don't think that would be in people's interests. So I still maintain that the red button is the solution, whether it's practical or not. But maybe, you know, I might have a different view on that than someone else might have. But in general, I'm not against the idea of sentient life existing if it can't experience any suffering. Whereas maybe an EFIList might be against it, but I'm not sure of any real world cases of that.
What I am more afraid of than anything is creating fates worse than death in an attempt to fix this thing. So like a lot of transhumanism or some of these other things that have been proposed, they sound great on paper, but I just really fear that the road to getting there is going to cause so much more, so many more unique and sort of at this point unfathomable forms of suffering and exploitation that it's probably better to leave well enough alone, and to have the ability to end it instantly would be a far greater, more humane fix than this. I mean, you know, people don't even want to get vaccinated. I don't think they're going to turn into robots without a fight. So I just don't. I don't trust the game plan in the push to fix it.
I'm still recording, but how do you feel this went? What would you?
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest things that was going through my mind during pretty much all of the questions is, well, this question applies to like I don't know if we can call them regular antinatalists. So maybe we need a term. We'll just call them antinatalists for non-EFIList antinatalists. Like so many of these questions apply to antinatalists too, right? What are some of the criticisms that you get? What about in Mendham's character or other characters within the movement? Question. I'm just looking through the list of questions.
Oh yeah, while you're looking, if there's anything you want to clarify, please go ahead.
Guys, I'll be back in 2 seconds. Okay, 2 seconds.
Sure. Yeah. What do you think critics get right or wrong? Veganism, is there a connection between it? Atheism or anything else? So I think a lot of those questions do apply to antinatalists too. And I think when I asked you before if there would be any non-EFILists who are coming on, I think that would have been great just to see where they go. I think whenever you're forced to defend a position, you kind of feel a little bit on the back foot, and you know, it's very easy to
I'm not familiar with that term. What's a back foot? What do you mean?
To be on the back foot, to be in a defensive position.
Okay, gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Whereas I think if there were more non-EFIList antinatalists on there, then maybe there could be a more, for the people watching it, if they've got this far, they could maybe better make their mind up then, you know, because if I want to ask, like, well, if you say, oh, you're in favor of the red button and killing all people, then at least we can fire back with, like, you're okay with this barbarism, with this bloodbath continuing for billions more years. What do you say to this? And I feel like that would be an interesting perspective to have. Like, what are antinatalists willing to accept?
The problem is that it's really hard to find somebody that's willing to do it. You know, I think like EFILism has become this thing that you don't engage. I mean, I know we're recording. I don't know if you want to cut this out, but they gave Mark unbelievable amounts of shit for wanting to do this, you know, just to talk to us. I mean, one of our friends, you know, had him on his channel and questioned him about, you know, whether it was okay to work with me on exploring anti-natalism, because he's like, you know, somehow giving credence to EFILism and he shouldn't work with an EFIList. So that's the kind of circumstance we're existing in right now, where like, and you know, you don't talk to them, you don't mention them, you don't. That sucks. You know, that's how bad it's gotten. So it's really hard to find somebody that's willing to do it, and it's really difficult to find somebody that's reasonable.
So in the future, if I was to host a discussion, Glenos, you seem to be up for talking with an anti-EFIList. Would you like to debate or discuss with someone like that?
Yeah, I mean, discuss, absolutely fine. I'm happy to discuss with anyone. If it's a debate, then I would like for the points to be agreed upon beforehand and the format to be agreed upon beforehand. I'm not the strongest of debaters, and believe it or not, I don't like to be very rude to people. And so, yeah, I don't know how it would go if someone was acting in an aggressive or a rude way to me. But yeah, I mean, in principle, I'm happy to do that. I know Anti-natalist Outreach, I was really shocked to find out that he wasn't an EFIList. And
was.
Yourself. Oh, he used to be?
5 minutes ago.
Okay, curious. Yeah. Because everything, you know, I follow him on Instagram and he posts all of his tweets and they're extremely EFIList in nature, extremely. So I'm confused about like the points of contention. I understand the idea that you want to force extinction rubs people the wrong way, but I mean, Mark, you have obviously you speak to a wide range of people. I know Amanda does too. What are the biggest concerns? Obviously, you mentioned earlier some people are afraid of comments like Leith made, that they're ready to do anything possible to stop pregnant women from giving birth. But what would you say are the biggest points of contention from non-EFIList antinatalists?
Well, like, do you even have a right to end everybody's life? And do you have if you, in my case, if you were to say it's okay to bring about the cessation of all sentient life for the global scale, what's stopping it from the individual scale? So I'd question what the logic is behind that as well. And also, I just don't think the argument is hashed out enough. Like, I don't think it's nuanced enough. I don't think it's philosophically rigorous.
Oh, it's not philosophically rigorous, I'll grant you that.
Yeah.
There has been no academic, as far as I know, there's been no academic literature.
So when people use emotional things like you're allowing horror to happen if you don't push this button, I'm like, okay, before we go into like how much I'm allowing horror by not pressing a magic button that doesn't exist, can you give me a philosophically rigorous argument about why I should violate people's autonomy when we're like, we can't impose things on people? And also, what are your views on death? Is death a harm? What kind of harm is it? Now, those are like questions that I think are valid, but they are philosophical questions. And it's really hard to sit down and have these conversations. And I'm comfortable saying, hey, for the time being, I'm going to be like agnostic on this, or I'm just going to be like, David Pearce has a theoretical model of bringing about infinite bliss. To me, that seems just as plausible as saying that there's a magic red button. And until you can show me plausibility and also grounded ethically with the philosophical rigor, then I can go forward with that. But right now, I'm stuck in a place right now, because I'm more in alignment with deontological thinking than negative utilitarianism. So now we have to have a normative ethics debate. And if I don't even think we can even get there, let alone, you know.
Yeah, and in my experience, normative ethics debates never actually lead to many resolutions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm probably, I mean, maybe we need, I don't know if we have any massively qualified philosophical EFILists who are actually making literature about this stuff. I mean, for me, I approach it from like an everyday, like a layperson's approach to it, right? Where when I'm presented with the idea of the thought experiment, when I'm presented with the idea of the red button as a thought experiment, and I consider, well, the benefits and the harms, it's a simple cost-benefit analysis of what you're allowing to continue. And again, I'm using the word allowing under the rules of the hypothetical where the red button magically appears.
Yeah.
What would I do in that situation? And also, what is the ethical thing to do in that situation? And so I'm wrestling with that, not as a philosopher, but just as a person, and thinking, well, on the one hand, you might have to end all lives if that's the particular type of red button. And we know there are many red button thought experiments. Wrestling with that idea of breaking those principles of deontology, and then also dealing with the consequentialist issue of, by not pressing it, what are you allowing to happen with that?
But see, again, the individual case, if you say consent, autonomy can be violated for the greater good, that goes into some problems ethically with, again, individual cases. So those are some criticisms that I think are legitimate. And I'm sorry if I got a little bit aggressive with when people talk about how much they like Gary's methodology. I get upset because, like, if you were to talk to me in an insulting manner while talking about this type of normative ethics or whatever, I don't think we would make any progress. And I just think it would be unfair when I'm trying to inquire, or someone else is trying to inquire into it as well. So that's why I get kind of defensive when people are like, because when I first got into the anti-natalist movement, a lot of people asked me about the red button. And if I said one, I didn't know, and that's something I want to normalize in these types of conversations. It's okay to say, I don't know. And then the second thing, if I didn't push it for whatever ethical problem I had with it, I was seen as a moral monster within the community. And like, that bothered me because I'm like, well, what did I just enter into? But you know, I've stayed around for a while, so now I'm kind of used to it. But
I mean, I don't know, honestly, if some of these conversations can happen if there's going to be limitations on what kind of personalities, you know, are acceptable or not. Like, I think it took somebody with that personality saying it for the conversation to begin. And I appreciate that that kind of personality is not going to jive with other types of personalities. And I think that that's fine. I mean, there is more than one of us to have the conversation with. I don't know. It's a very, you know, the other part of it is, you know, it's a very young philosophy. And also the conversation around wild animal suffering is unfortunately pretty new and just beginning. And I think as some of these, I see all the potential in the world essentially for this conversation to become more academic. But I think that it's been meaningful that it's at least started on a sort of ground level, you know, everyman kind of approach, because anybody should be able to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to add that I have seen many cases of Gary communicating perfectly fine and reasonable with people.
Absolutely.
Too. Not every case, you know, he doesn't lose his temper in every single interaction that he has with people. I've had several interactions with him where he's been perfectly fine and likable and charming and funny, and other cases where he's been riled up and lost his temper. So I don't think he's incapable of doing it. I mean, I don't know. You had a 15-minute conversation with him. That I guess that went okay.
Yeah, it went fine. But like I mean, yeah, he didn't insult me or anything like that. But the thing is, like, when I think about people like Superhuman Dance or people who mimic their aggression and they see that as a good way to debate. So it's not just, I'm not trying to say it's Gary. What I'm trying to say is people who want to mimic that style. And then I can't really engage with anybody because people are going to be insulting me, calling me a moral monster and stuff like that. It's only through luck and through being socially connected to people through various projects that I was able to, you know, sit down with everybody. But not everybody has that opportunity. And I'm pretty sure people would love to have these discussions. I'm 100% certain people are going to say, oh, Mark, you didn't ask this question and you didn't push hard enough or whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, it's on you now, you guys. You make your
yeah, they can do the interviews. I mean, what's stopping them from doing it themselves? I don't know. I just think it gets a little tricky with expectations of what to expect from personalities and stuff. I mean, if you're, it would be really, really great if everybody had these sort of manicured polite ways of engaging in discourse, I don't think that that's something that can be expected. I just don't think that that's realistic.
Especially on
so
YouTube.
Yeah, especially on YouTube. But, quite frankly, I've met people with worse personalities in academia too. So I just don't, I can understand wanting something different. I don't know. I mean,
the subject matter is also like a very passionate one, right? Like, let's imagine there's a situation where you have to engage in a debate between, let's say, sorry to bring up an awful example, but let's say you see someone being raped and you're kind of standing there and you want to stop it, and someone else says, well, how do you ground your right to interfere with this person's autonomy? It's like, he's fucking raping her, like, get her off. And I think that comes into our minds a lot of like, fuck, I have to go through this rigor, and I have to explain why bad things are bad, and I have to go through all of this stuff of like meta ethics and normative ethics to say that I want to stop things from being tortured. And that's not a criticism against you, Mark. I'm not putting you in that category. I'm just talking about the nature of academic and philosophical rigor in general. That philosophy is great, and it forms a extremely useful function of clarifying exactly what people believe, at least analytical philosophy. But
and I want to say I sympathize with that, because I think when I was talking to Weinberg, she was like, well, how do you even ground altruism in the first place? And I'm like, do I really have to figure out like why I have to care, and
it's frustrating.
why I should be like charitable to other people and care about other people? Like, but I get it. Yeah, I mean, like, some of this is necessary. If you're going to make a prescription, you got to go through some of the groundwork. But it is frustrating. I get it.
And I am not a philosopher, believe it or not. I am not a philosopher. I am not a person who can sit down and ground all of these things. And even with some terminology, it's very easy to get this imposter syndrome and think like, oh shit, I'm a person who maybe is empathetic and sympathetic and worried about harm, and just doing the best that I can with my limited education and limited brain to kind of point out to people like, hey, this kind of sucks. No, like, should we try to stop it, given that we are the only ones with the chance to stop it? Should we not try and force this somehow? And I don't know, hopefully there will be more academic people who are able to give you what you want, and to give the other antinatalists what they want, which seems to be, grounding certain claims and explaining things in a more rigorous way.
Do any of you have any closing statements before we wrap up?
Yeah, I first of all just want to say thanks to Amanda and for Laith and Matt for coming on, and huge thanks to you, Mark, for setting this up and asking questions. Questions were thoughtful, they were provocative, they gave us room to think, and we even had some disagreements on some issues. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a long time, and I kind of feel like after all of these hours, my mental energy is kind of exhausted. But yeah, I just want to say huge thanks to you, particularly Mark.
Yeah, and I want to say the same. Thank you so much, Glenn. It's really a pleasure to see you again, and also to Life Sucks and Laith and to you. Did I miss anybody? And to you, Mark. This is something probably EFIList should do a little bit more often. We really don't talk to each other very much, and no, I appreciate you, taking the time to assemble all this, and also to sort of bear the burden of wanting to do something like this, and the pushback that you've received for wanting to spend some time with a bunch of filthy EFILists. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate everybody that came on today. So we went. I didn't know it was going to last this long, but I really appreciate the time and going through the questions, and yeah, just thank you again. And hopefully more conversation will happen. All right. Take care, everybody. Cheers.